In Memphis, young lawyer Mark Roberts lives a lie. After his brother Stevie's death, Mark marries Sandy, but their love is a facade, orchestrated for political power. As Mark uncovers Sandy's deceit and his father's hidden affair, the betrayal cuts deep. With everything unraveling, Mark faces a dangerous choice: stay silent or unleash a storm of revenge. In a world where trust is shattered, Mark must decide, how far will he go when the truth is a weapon? I stood on the balcony of our apartment, looking down at the wide, muddy Mississippi River flowing slowly below me. The sun was almost touching the horizon but wasn't hurrying to set. It seemed to enjoy the moment, hanging there like it was taking its time on a long, hot summer day. The air felt warm and thick, softening everything around me. The lazy sunset matched my own feelings inside. The slowly fading light felt just right for my mood, for my marriage, and for my life. I looked down at my hands resting on the railing. My wedding ring sparkled in the light, reminding me of the promise I had made. It shone brightly as the sun sank lower. A rush of memories filled my mind. I took off the ring and held it for a moment. Then, after thinking deeply, I tossed it toward the setting sun. I have to say, it wasn't too hard to let go. I had wanted Sandra to be in charge since we met in middle school. She was everything that a true Southern lady should be: beautiful, strong, smart, and friendly. She was about 5 feet 4 inches tall, with blonde hair and bright blue eyes that sparkled with happiness. She moved with elegance and fit in perfectly at family gatherings. Sadly, even though I liked her a lot, Sandra was in love with my older brother, Stevie. Stevie was everything I wasn't. He was tall and fit, with curly brown hair. People naturally liked him, and he had a way of winning everyone's heart. He was expected to follow in our father's footsteps and had a bright future ahead. Everyone believed this, and they were right. His confidence made people think he would go far, and everyone felt that Sandra was the right girl for him. Together, they looked like the perfect couple. One night, I had just gotten into bed after a show when the phone rang. I murmured, "This better be important," still feeling sleepy. It was Stevie. Mom's voice was shaky as she said, "He's gone. There was a car accident." I don't remember much about the week that followed, but some moments are still clear in my mind. I remember Sandy at the funeral wearing a black dress. Her veil seemed to mix with the dark clouds gathering above us. I saw Mom and Dad hurry past reporters who were asking questions as they got into a big black car and drove away. I almost laughed. It was funny to think about Dad trying to avoid reporters during an important election. "Maybe we should leave now, son," the minister said softly, touching my arm. I looked around and saw that no one else was there anymore. Just me and him, along with a few workers trying to cover the grave before the rain came. Dad won the election easily, partly because people felt deeply about losing his young son, who had just begun what looked like a bright future. Looking back, that was the start of everything. I have to give credit to the political experts. They knew everything and didn't want to miss any chance, even if it seemed a bit wrong. I think the expressions on faces said it all. I wish I had understood things better when I was younger. It's hard to accept that my own family could treat me like that. A year and a half later, the day after Thanksgiving, my dad called me for an important talk. We were in the den, which was his office at home. It had big chairs, dark wood furniture, a rich red carpet, and a large oak desk. This time, it was one of the few times I was allowed to stay longer than just a quick visit, so I knew it was serious. "What are you going to do with your life, Mark?" he asked. "What do you mean, Dad?" I replied. He looked at me closely and took a sip of his drink. "You can't keep putting off becoming an adult. You can't change jobs all the time while wishing to be a famous musician someday." "Maybe you could let me finish law school before I rush into everything," I suggested. "Don't be disrespectful," he replied. I stayed quiet and bit my lip. He looked at me and I could tell he was thinking. "It's your last year," he said. "In 6 or 7 months you need to find a job. Have you thought about that?" I smiled. "I applied to the public defender's office in Memphis," I said. His face showed he wasn't happy with that. "Memphis?" he repeated slowly. "Public defender's office?" "Yes," I confirmed. He shook his head. "That's not going to happen." "Why not?" I asked. Because my son won't work in a place like that. Can you imagine how the media would react if you actually helped those people? Would they praise me for standing up for the idea that everyone is innocent until proven guilty? I replied. Don't push it. You know what I mean. You can't work for the public defender's office, and you'll stop me. He nodded. I felt blank, realizing he could use his connections to make things hard for me. Then what? What do you want for my life? I have to give him credit. He didn't look down at me when I showed my frustration. Do you really want to go to Memphis? He asked. I nodded. I need to be on my own. I can't do that here in Nashville, Dad. You know that, right? He nodded and finished his drink before going to get more. When he returned, I was surprised when he offered me another glass. I took the drink and sipped it, enjoying the warmth as it went down. You're right. You need to find your own path in life, but there's nothing wrong with getting help from your dad when you start out. What kind of help? I asked. He put his drink down and leaned in closer. I spoke to Jim Parker at Parker & Smythe. They have some jobs open, and he's very interested in you. I closed my eyes and leaned back, looking at the ceiling. So, you agree I need to leave, and your idea of leaving is for me to work for your campaign, Chairman? You're not going to be working on my campaign, Mark. He has 2 openings for new associates. One person works with a partner who handles appeals, and the other is in business law. He thinks I could do well in either job. I sighed and glanced at him. He seemed so confident, lost in his own thoughts. I wanted to believe this was a good choice. Of course, he knew I would prefer the position in Memphis, and he had a backup plan ready. Still, it sounded like a good opportunity. I decided to tell him I want the appeals role, not business law. I confirmed I wanted the appeals position. This way, I can avoid the business people who only want to talk to me because of him. He seemed a bit disappointed, but only a little. I'll call him this afternoon, he said. That works for me. I stood up, finished my drink, and placed the glass down. I'll see you at dinner, Dad. Are you going to thank me? He asked. He didn't reply. Just under a month later, I was helping Edwina pick up the glasses and plates scattered on the lower floor. The Christmas party was over, and many important guests had come to see David Roberts, the senior senator from Tennessee. My mom spoke to me with a sharper voice than usual. She said I should not be helping with cleaning up when that was the job for the staff. I'm just finishing up here, Mom. I want to take Edwina home to her grandkids who are waiting for Santa, I replied. I glanced at Edwina, who smiled nervously as if saying I should go before I made things harder for her. Taking her hint, I picked up a tray of dirty dishes and walked to the kitchen. Did you see Sandy tonight? My mom asked while I loaded the dishes into the dishwasher. Yes, I talked to her a little bit, I said. A little bit? I turned to face her and leaned against the counter. What's going on, Mom? She pressed her lips together and then lowered her voice as if sharing a secret. I think she likes you. Really? I replied, surprised. The whisper sounded too extreme, and her idea felt a bit silly. Deborah and Pat both said I was starting to share more. Mom continued, Pat, talk to your dad. Deborah asked me if you liked Sandy. She mentioned that Sandy has been asking about you. Pat brought it up too, in a roundabout way, but it seemed like she cared. I found that strange and said, I didn't feel that way when I spoke to her. Mom gave a small smile, which made her point seem more convincing. We can be good at hiding our emotions, you know. It's often less obvious for us than it is for you all. I didn't realize it then, but her words would stick with me later. Anyway, Mom went on before I could answer. Maybe you could call her and ask her to dinner. The Christmas party at the club is tomorrow night, and I know she doesn't have a date. You want me to call her at the last minute? Why? I asked. Because maybe she doesn't want to go. Mom smiled again, like she knew something I didn't. I think she would if the right person asked. Why are you suddenly so excited about this? I asked. She seemed a bit hurt, but I recognized that expression well. She used it often. I swear all moms know how to do this. Come on, I said. Is it wrong that I want you to be happy with a girl you've always liked? A girl who felt like part of this family and has always been like the daughter I never had. Moms. Am I the only one who thinks they are really good at pulling the sympathy card, even when it doesn't really touch you? You go along with it to keep things smooth, right? It must be in their nature. I sighed. Okay, but only if you send Edwina home to be with her family now. You're calling me at the last minute on a Saturday. Do you really think I have nothing else to do except go to this party with you?" Sandy laughed, keeping her tone light. She had a way of teasing that made me feel a bit silly for asking her. One of the most delightful girls in Nashville decided to join me at a nice party just a few hours before it began. There was something sweet about how she teased me, which made everything more enjoyable. She had a way of laughing at herself that made everyone feel welcome. So she asked me. I smiled and said, "I guess that's what I'm doing, Miss Sandra." She laughed and replied, "Truly, Ellen, you seem quite sure of yourself." I chuckled and she joined in. I told her, "I understand if you have other plans, Sandy. Saturdays can be busy, but I thought I'd give it a shot." "Oh, really? You want to give it a shot?" she asked. "Yes, just a small chance," I answered. She laughed again, then said, "Let me check my calendar. Guess what? I think I'm free this evening." I smiled, picturing her playful look even through the phone as we joked. It was all in good fun, and I could almost see her twirling her hair as she talked. "Since that's the case," I said, "Yes. Yes." "What you said makes me wonder, what does that mean? Didn't I already invite you to the party? You asked if I wanted you to join me at the party. I know I did. It's not nice to interrupt a lady. It's not kind to correct a gentleman or make him wait. Am I doing that?" "Yes, that's exactly what you're doing." "All right, Mark Roberts, I won't keep you waiting anymore. What time will you pick me up? 6. Isn't that a bit early? Not when I get to spend more time with you." She chuckled lightly. "You're quite charming." "So 6 it is. I'll ask Dad to borrow the car for our outing. That car won't work," he said, waving at my smaller car. At 5 to 6, I arrived at Pat and Deborah Trolson's nice white house and parked in front of the big entrance. Pat answered the door himself. "Mark, come right in," he said, holding the door open. "Sandy is still getting ready upstairs. She won't be ready for a few more minutes. Would you like to have a drink with me in the study?" he asked. "Of course," I replied, feeling a bit nervous. Patrick Wilson was a state politician, just like you would imagine a leader from Tennessee. He was taller than me and had a strong build from playing college football. His hands were big and strong. His face was friendly and his hair was neatly styled. Even in casual clothes, he carried himself with confidence. "Please don't call me sir," he said as he led me into his study, "and don't call me Mr. Speaker." He made his voice a bit deeper for the last part. He picked up 2 glasses from his desk, handed one to me, and pointed to a chair nearby. "Just call me Pat, okay?" I nodded and tried to smile. "So, what are your plans, son?" he asked as I settled in and took a sip of my drink. I looked around the study while I spoke. "I'll be graduating soon in May. I'm going to take the bar exam in July and find out the results in September or October. I hope this will lead to a happy life." As I looked around, the office reminded me of my dad's. It had nice carpets and an important feel to it. I wondered if Dad's style inspired Mr. Truly, or if they both had the same designer for their spaces. The main difference in their offices was the statues they had. Dad had one of General Lee, while Mr. Truly had one of General George Gordon from Tennessee. "Do you like that one?" he asked, noticing me looking at the statue. I smiled. "Some people say he helped start the Klan." Mr. Truly's smile faded a bit, and he paused before saying, "I told you to call me Pat, son." "I'm sorry, but that's not how my parents raised me," I replied. He nodded, relaxing in his chair and taking a sip of his drink. "That's fair. Anyway, your dad mentioned you have a job ready at Jim Parker's firm in Memphis." "I only went for one interview there. I haven't heard back from them yet." He laughed. "Trust me, it's already done." I nodded, feeling a bit upset. Everyone thought I only got this chance because of my dad's help. "I was on the law review at Northwestern," I said. "I've turned down nearly a dozen job offers from top companies in the Midwest." "So, why Memphis?" I took a moment and decided to be honest. "I like the music there." "The music?" "Yes, sir. I play guitar in a band back in Chicago, but I think the music scene is better in Memphis." "And what about being a lawyer?" I shrugged. "It's just how I make a living." His face turned serious. "And your duties to your family?" "My family? Your future family." "I don't have a wife or kids, sir." He thought for a moment, then leaned back and smiled. "But one day you will, Mark. When that happens, will you still follow your music dream, or will you focus on providing for them?" To be honest, he hadn't thought much about that yet. "Daddy," Sandy called out from the doorway. I stood up when I heard her voice and turned to look at her. She looked beautiful, bright, and full of energy, like a star in an old movie. "Why don't you stop trying to scare him before our first outing?" Sandy said with a playful smile. "Sure thing, sweetie. I'll save that for the third outing," I replied. "Just leave him alone," Patrick said. Mrs. Truly joined us then. "Hello, Mark." "Good evening, Mrs. Wilson. Are you ready to go, Mark?" Sandy asked. "Whenever you're ready." She reached out her arm, and I walked over to take it. "Good night, Mr. and Mrs. Tolson. You watch over our daughter, Mr. Truly," they called after us. "I promise," I said as I quickly led Sandy to the car. "Sorry about that," she said once we were driving. "No need to apologize," I replied. She laughed. "What's so funny?" I asked. "You know, they never do that with the girls, only with the guys," she said. "Exactly," I agreed, and then her laughter continued. "Can you picture it?" I smiled and tried to copy her father's voice. "So, young lady, what are your plans with my sweet son?" I asked playfully. "Well, Mr. Speaker," she said, pretending to act innocent, "I promise my plans are completely good. I'm sorry, but we might have to end this before it starts." "Oh, come on!" She laughed and gave me a gentle tap on the arm. I chuckled too, but then my smile faded and I grew serious. "What's bothering you?" she asked. I could feel her looking at me, and I didn't want to spoil the moment. "It's not anything big. You can share if you want. I promise I won't be harsh." I quickly glanced at her and then back at the road. "What about you, Sandy?" I asked. She paused and then said, "What do you mean?" "I just think it's a bit odd that you're engaged to Stevie," I replied. I waited for her response, but she stayed silent until we parked at the club. "Stevie is gone," she said softly as I turned off the car. I could hear the sadness in her voice. "We all need to move on. It's been almost a year and a half, and we need to keep moving on." "I understand," I said softly. "And I like you, Mark." She smiled and put her hand on my arm. I turned to her and she looked happy. "I really do. I've always liked you, but I'm not Stevie. I know." She gave a small, sad laugh. "Believe me, I know." Then she looked away and went on. "I'm not trying to take his place. You get that, right?" I felt a bit confused, but she just smiled and wrapped her shawl around herself. "How would I know that?" I wanted to ask. But I stayed quiet. I got out of the car, helped her out, and took her to the dance, starting a new chapter for both of us. The Christmas party was fun. Honestly, it was wonderful. It was probably the best time I'd ever had at a party, enjoying the night without any worries. In fact, the whole Christmas break was amazing. It felt like we kicked things off at the party, dancing and talking. Soon, we were spending all our time together. She woke up bright and early the next morning, and we went for a drive that afternoon. We spent Christmas Eve with family, but we still found time to be together almost all day on Christmas. One good thing about having politicians in the family is that they often spend their holidays at shelters and hospitals, taking a lot of photos to show they care about people in need. Sometimes it seems like they care more about this than their work. Because of this, Sandy and I had plenty of time to enjoy our time together. Then the doorbell rang at 9:30 on Christmas morning. I got out of bed and walked down the stairs in my pajamas. I opened the door to see Sandy with a big smile on her face. Her eyes sparkled with happiness. Even though I didn't have much hair, I looked more fit than my loose clothes might suggest. She looked at me for a moment before smiling and asking, "Did you get me a present?" I smiled back, still yawning, and nodded as I stepped aside to let her in. She wrapped her arms around me, her cold clothes surprising me and waking me up a bit. "Merry Christmas," she said. "Merry Christmas," I replied, giving her a quick kiss on the cheek. Her kiss back was warm and caught me off guard. After a moment, I gently pulled away. "I'll brush my teeth first." "It's not that bad," she said cheerfully as she tossed her coat onto the bench and kicked off her shoes. She gave me a small gift. "I got you something, too." I smiled at the little box, shaking it lightly but not hearing anything inside. "Let's move to the living room. But I want to open mine first," she said, leading us to the kitchen. "Coffee sounds nice. I'll make it while you get ready." "I'll be quick," I replied, watching her bounce down the hall with excitement. "Come on, hurry up," she shouted back. "I can't wait to see what you got me." 10 minutes later, we were enjoying warm coffee next to the Christmas tree. "I wonder what it is," I said. Sandy giggled as she held the box, looking at my not-so-great wrapping job. Then she ripped the paper off and opened the box. "Oh, Mark!" she exclaimed, seeing the 3 silk scarves inside. "They're beautiful." "You really think so?" I asked. She admired them for a moment before putting the box down and leaning over to give me a sweet kiss. "Really?" she said when we pulled away. "Maybe you'll like this too," I said, reaching under the couch for 2 more boxes. Inside were 2 blouses and a sweater, and her face lit up even more when she saw them. I finished my coffee and stood up. "Aren't you going to open my present?" she asked, trying to hide her excitement. "In a minute," I replied, lifting my empty cup. "I need some energy." When I came back, I sat beside her and handed her a small, wrapped box. Just one last thing. Her eyes grew wide with joy as she looked from the box to me. "You shouldn't have done all this." "I didn't really get you much," I said, smiling and enjoying our time together. "You've made me happy. For the first time, I truly understand the joy of giving." Her hands shook a little as she opened the small box. She stared at me, unsure, then peeked inside. "It's beautiful, Mark," she said, a tear coming to her eye. "Merry Christmas, Sandy," I replied softly, wiping her tears away as she took out the small gold locket. "Open it." She opened it and saw the picture of us from our first date last week. She smiled, but there was a touch of sadness that made me worry. I must have upset her. "Are you okay?" I asked. She nodded, still looking at the picture. Then she gently closed the locket and gave me the box. "Please put it around my neck." I did, feeling her fingers lightly touch the locket at her throat. I stayed quiet, sipping my coffee as she gathered her thoughts. She stared at the empty box beside her legs when she finally spoke. "I'm sorry. It's just that, well, you're one of the nicest people I've ever met." Then she looked up and smiled. "That's a nice thing to say," I said, giving a small smile. "Thank you." She stepped closer and hugged me tightly. "You really are a good person, aren't you?" I didn't say anything but hugged her back. "Okay," she said, letting go and standing up, trying to look cheerful. "I'll get more coffee and then you can open your gift." "Hurry up," I called to her as she walked away. Soon she knelt behind me, wrapped her arms around my neck and whispered, "It's not a big deal, really. It's all about how you see it." I took my time but quickly opened the paper and looked inside the box. "Do you like it?" she asked softly, moving closer. "It's—" I started, pulling out the gift. "I thought you might enjoy it," she said quietly. I tried to hide my surprise, figuring out what she meant. "Merry Christmas," she whispered, giving me a gentle push. I laughed, feeling mixed emotions as we enjoyed this moment together. "Yes, really," I replied, smiling back at her with sincerity. Then I turned and gave her a gentle kiss. We shared a sweet, quiet moment together, enjoying the warmth of our closeness. As we hugged a little tighter, I felt grateful for the affection between us. "Let's go upstairs," she said softly as she stood up. "No way," I replied gently, pulling her back into my arms. "We have plenty of time." She smiled brightly at me. "But what if someone knocks on the door?" I chuckled softly. "Then they'll just have to wait." We settled into a cozy spot on the sofa, soaking in the moment. The room felt peaceful, and we didn't need to say much. What we did showed how we felt, clearly and honestly. The scene captured our strong bond, filled with warmth and care, keeping the troubles of the world away. I worried that everything was happening too fast. I thought things might get complicated or fall apart before they even began. Sandy seemed to notice this too, and I saw her expression change. She looked proud and happy. Most importantly, she looked happy. Her smile got bigger, and her eyes shined with joy. This made me curious, and I might have stayed puzzled if Sandy hadn't reached out to play with my hair, pulling me closer. I focused on her, feeling a nice warmth between us. Then I closed my eyes and leaned in, sensing her happiness nearby. I heard a soft sigh, followed by a nice breath. I was lying on my side, gently touching Sandy's hip, which was against me. My cheek rested against her neck as we breathed together. "What are you thinking about?" she asked quietly. I snuggled in closer. I wasn't sure if I wanted to say anything. Even though our connection was wonderful, there was a little bit of guilt and doubt in the calm. Sandy turned to look at me when she saw my face. She gave me a friendly smile and touched my cheek. "You feel bad, don't you?" she asked. I shrugged because of Stevie. I closed my eyes. "This is all just a bit confusing. We need to move on, Mark. Both of us do. Yes, I was with Stevie, but he's gone now, okay? But I'm not like him. I don't see why you would want to be with me. That's exactly why I'm with you now, because you're not like him. If you were, it wouldn't work." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'd be looking for someone else and you'd be pretending to be someone you're not. But you don't pretend to be him. You've never tried to act like him. And you won't. You two didn't compete for me. This wouldn't work if you were like him." "Except when it came to you," I said. "We both liked you." Her hand rested on my cheek. "You never asked me out, Mark. Not even once. But I wanted to. He knew that, and he asked me first." "I didn't know he never told me. Don't feel bad. That's not the point." "But if I had," she looked deep into my eyes, a mix of doubt and sadness swirling there. She understood what I meant, and her expression softened. "You're right. If I had known, and if you'd asked me at that moment, I might have picked him. You're right about that. But does it really matter? What do you mean, does it matter? Just that. So what? That was in the past. This is the present. You say it like it doesn't matter anymore, but it really doesn't. Why not? I don't understand what you're saying. Stevie was popular and confident. He was a leader, and I feel so different. I'm not like him at all. How can you even like me after him?" I asked, a bit confused. She smiled softly and raised an eyebrow. "You see something ordinary in yourself? But I see something special. You think you're shy, but I see you as kind and caring. Everyone has their flaws, Mark. We all do, right?" "Yeah, but it feels like you're settling for less." She gently squeezed my arm. "This isn't just okay. I might not know a lot, but I know what I like, and you really stand out to me. You might not see it, but I do. That made me feel a bit better. So this feels good for you? Want to hear a secret?" "Sure. You really took me by surprise. I don't often feel this close to someone, but with you it felt different." I smiled at her. "Thanks." She gently touched my cheek and leaned in for a soft kiss. It was warm and nice. For the next 3 weeks, we enjoyed every moment together. As winter break was ending, I started to worry about what would happen next. 2 days before I had to return to Chicago for my last semester, we were lying together on the bed in the afternoon. "Why do you look so sad?" she asked, resting against me. "What do we do now?" "Now? I'm leaving in 2 days. You are going in 3. Are we going to keep this going?" She tucked herself in closer. "We can see each other on weekends when we can, and during spring break we can spend time together and talk online." "Are you sure?" "Are you?" "I guess so." She playfully nudged me, filling the room with laughter. "You guess? I thought you were just looking for a break. Then it's back to the city with all your fans after you and your band." "They're not just fans," I said quickly. "Who, the fans or the band?" "Neither," I replied, playfully holding her wrists. "Especially the fans. You little troublemaker." She laughed and squirmed. We rolled around on the bed, laughing and joking for a bit until we finally slowed down, breathless from the fun. "I'm going to be here for you, Mark," she said seriously. "You finish your degree and I'll finish mine. I might have a job in Memphis too, and then we can get a place together." I looked at her, surprised by what I heard. "You care about me? Really?" She smiled widely. "But why do you care about me?" "You know I do," she answered. "You've never said it. I didn't want to scare you away. It felt too soon." "But you do care." Her smile brightened, lighting up her face. I nodded with a grin. "Then say it." "Say what?" "That you care about me." "Okay, I care about you." "Say it like you really mean it." "Sandra Olson, I care about you more than anything. No star in the night sky shines brighter. Shines just like how I feel about you." "Oh, come on," she said, turning over with a little smile. "I meant it more seriously." I laughed, but it is true. "Oh, really? Really?" She smiled back and said, "Okay, well, I guess I like you too. You guess?" She shrugged. "Isn't it a bit early for all this?" "You little trickster," I replied, keeping the fun vibe. "Did you just call me a trickster?" Yes. For some reason, that made her laugh more, and it only stopped when I started poking her sides. At first, she tried to wiggle away, but then she leaned in closer as her laughter faded. "Looks like someone is in a fun mood," she said, grinning. Sandy kept her promise. Every day she sent me little messages, funny and kind, sometimes sharing her thoughts about something. We talked on the phone 3 or 4 times a week, which cost a bit since we lived far apart. Even with the distance, we got closer through our messages and calls. I learned to notice her feelings and enjoyed her fun, sometimes surprising ways. She often said things I didn't expect, making it hard to know if she was kidding or being serious. Just when I thought to ask her something, she would giggle sweetly, and I would find myself laughing at a joke that stayed with me all evening. It was exciting and joyful, like the happy moments you see in old movies or hear about in songs. Sandy was more than just someone refreshing. She was a strong breeze that filled my life and made me hold on. It felt amazing. We spent spring break together in Chicago. She came to see my band perform at 2 shows, one at a club in Lincoln Park and another in the suburbs. The rest of the week was simple and fun, walking hand in hand around the city, visiting museums, exploring the zoo, and taking strolls by the lake. "Why do you seem so sad?" Sandy asked gently as we lay there. I was on my back, staring at the ceiling. She was curled up next to me, softly touching my arm. I shrugged a little. "Are you sad I'm leaving?" she joked, thinking my face looked funny. "What is this?" I asked, a bit louder than I meant to. As I turned to look at her, she seemed surprised for a moment, but then smiled again. "This is the last semester before we start new things in our lives." She laughed. "What does all this mean, Sandy?" Now she looked confused. "What do you mean, us?" I asked. "Don't you know?" "I'm not sure," I replied. She gave me a curious look and rolled her eyes playfully. "Looks like I have to think for both of us," she said. "I can't tell when you're serious or just joking." Her face became more serious as she locked eyes with me. "Really? You want me to be serious?" I nodded. "Okay, how about this? We both graduate in late May, move to Memphis, find apartments close to each other, share our plans by September, and have a nice wedding next August." "Does that sound good?" she asked, smiling. I was taken aback by her words. She smiled wider. "No need to make things hard, right?" I shook my head. "How long have you been thinking about this?" "Since Christmas night." She gave me a playful look. That's when I really felt good about us. I remembered that night. "It was special," she said, smiling. "Anyway," I said, now smiling too. "So that holiday evening made you want to marry me?" She shrugged. "Kind of." I nodded. "Do I get to have a say in this?" "Sure. If your mom doesn't mind, you can plan your own party." She and my mom are already working on the other details, the important ones, maybe even right now. I laughed. "Oh, really?" Seeing I was serious, she sighed. "You guys can be so clueless. You think it's easy to plan a wedding? Are you serious?" Confusion showed on her face, followed by frustration. She got off the bed, turning her back to me. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Is the idea of being married to me really that tough?" "What?" "No, it's just happening so fast. I was really surprised." She turned around, her eyes serious. "Do you think this is easy for me?" I raised my hands. "I'm just trying to say I appreciate everything you're doing. Look, I'm sorry. I just don't want to mess things up, okay? If you want to get married, let's do it." "We can go to City Hall to get the license." Her face changed as she smiled. "Okay, let's stick to the plan. Remember the engagement ring in September and the wedding ring the following August? Should I get down on one knee or something?" She laughed and moved closer. "I'll handle the proposals for now. Just remember what you said earlier." "What?" She grinned. "Something about showing gratitude, is that what you meant?" In that moment, we both understood what our future would look like. We didn't need to go into all the details of the next 18 months. Everything happened just as Sandy had said it would. We both had our own places in Memphis. Her apartment was rented by the month and wasn't used much. We got engaged in September. I passed my bar exam and got my license in October. We were married in August, and her dad became governor of Tennessee in November. There was a surprising twist, too. Soon after we graduated, Patterson said he would run for governor the next year. What could have been a small note in the news turned into a big story for gossip writers. The son of a senator and the daughter of a state speaker were getting married, which caught a lot of people's attention. Our engagement announcement was shared not just with family and friends, but also made its way to the press, thanks to Pat Ralston's campaign team. They wanted to create a buzz, but they also made Sandy and me a little nervous. One magazine had a headline that read, "From Hard Times to Happy Times." Entertainment News Tonight saw us as a love story and started following us closely with cameras, reporters, and photographers showing up at my home and job. "You should talk to them more," Patricia Burley often told me. She was the press representative for Troll Sons and wanted to share our story. I took her advice but was a bit unsure. "What do you mean, Patricia? Should I invite them over for snacks every day and take pictures? Oh no, maybe just cookies instead." I was surprised, but she seemed pleased with my idea. That was almost serious. Sandy, on the other hand, loved the attention. She always looked wonderful with just the right amount of makeup and a bright smile. When we mentioned Stevie, her smile would turn thoughtful. Then it would light up again as we talked about our engagement and plans for the wedding. I had to admit, she was made for this. Her background in communications and public relations was truly helpful. After our wedding, some private photos were shared without our permission a few weeks before the elections in November. The media lost some interest after that. Pat Ralston gave a touching speech in honor of Stevie, while also celebrating Sandy and me for moving ahead, which really connected with the crowd and helped him win big. As for me, I often felt a bit lost with everything going on. Patricia Patterson, the photographers and reporters were all part of the busy world around us, but Sandy and I were focused on settling into our new condo by the river, so I didn't stay upset for long. Life was good for just over 3 years. Then a problem appeared. That problem was named Napoleon Bonaparte, Bonnaroo. I know, surprising, right? Nap was a good guy, even if he had a few small problems and sometimes used alcohol. When he had a drink or two, things could get tricky. Sadly, in 1996, something serious happened at the Dewdrop just east of Memphis. Someone came in with bad plans and went to the cash register asking for money. They hurt the bartender before grabbing some cigarettes and leaving quickly. The police got a lead when a tipster said that someone named Bonnaroo was bragging about being part of the crime. Just 2 days later, officers saw Knapp leaving a store and brought him in for questions. At first, Knapp didn't want to help because he wanted to enjoy his evening, but the officers took him to the station anyway. After 11 hours, the police said that he confessed, but it was not written down or signed. Knapp had some injuries that the police said were from him resisting arrest. The trial judge did not allow Knapp to talk about the confession. In the end, the jury found him guilty and gave him a life sentence without the chance of parole. The state Supreme Court did not provide much clarity and sent the case back for a new sentencing because another mistake was found in the trial. In the end, the judge changed the death penalty to a life sentence. The appeals about the confession started over again. The state appellate court agreed with the trial judge's decision. Eventually, the Supreme Court overturned the previous decision, saying the confession should not have been presented in court. However, they concluded that there was enough other evidence to keep the conviction. They mentioned that allowing the jury to hear the confession, which was a key part of the state's case, did not harm Knapp's chances because other strong evidence was still against him. The United States Supreme Court decided not to take up the case. This could have been the final decision. But prison inmates often submit requests to the courts for new hearings. Knapp probably found a good lawyer in jail to help him out. He quickly filed a request for a legal review at the federal court in Memphis. That's when I got involved. Federal judges usually prefer clear and well-written requests from prisoners. Because of this, all of us with a federal trial license must take on at least one of these cases each year, investigate it, and present it properly for free. Knapp. Bonnaroo was the first case I was assigned. After looking through the file for a long time, it became clear that he had been in jail for 10 years based on a questionable confession that he might not have really made. "It's your case," Jim Parker said after I explained everything. "You can handle your other work, but focus on this one. If you need someone to talk to, you can reach out to Harvey. Just remember to take care of Harvey's cases and everything else too. Is that clear?" I nodded. Parker leaned back in his chair. "This is the big league, Mark. You can choose how to handle it, but you'll have to explain your choices later. Do you understand? Big law firms work like this. What better way for young lawyers to gain real experience than to let them manage a case for a prisoner who can't pay? It doesn't matter if the person is innocent and struggling. Welcome to real cases. I was, of course, scared. My legal work until then had mostly been about reviewing papers, doing a lot of research, and writing drafts of legal arguments. I had never run a case, never stood in a courtroom, and never argued in front of the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals in Cincinnati. Now, I had to take charge and work on a case that could change a person's future. Plus, I still had my regular workload of over 65 hours a week. What a thrill. The real challenges began 2 months later. Is something wrong here? I turned to see Sandy lying quietly under the covers. I know I need to finish this research, I said, putting on my jeans. Mark, it's 5:30 in the morning. On a Sunday, I was deep in thought about my case. But this is the only time I can really focus. And what kind of case are you working on? It's about a federal prisoner, a serious one, right? Not really, but you said he didn't do it. What are you doing to help him? I'm trying to get him out. And that means you can't come home until 11 at night. And you have to work 12 hours a day at the office on weekends. Do you think I'm enjoying this? Well, you don't seem very upset. I finished getting ready in silence. Sandy had a point. It was a big job, and I felt I needed to help someone who might be innocent. Well, she asked as I finished. I sat on the edge of the bed. What do you want me to do? Let this man stay in prison for something he probably didn't do? She looked at me with disappointment and sadness. I hadn't seen those feelings from her before. Listen, I spoke gently. I'll be home by 1 or 2, okay? I promise. We can spend the rest of the afternoon and evening together, doing whatever you want. She didn't say anything, just looked at me. When I got home that afternoon, Sandy was not there. She didn't answer her phone, and when I fell asleep on the couch, she still hadn't come back. As the weeks went on, I felt like we were growing apart. Sandy barely talked to me. Her face showed sadness and frustration. It was hard to see her like this, but I was too busy getting ready for the hearing. It wasn't about Bonner. It was about the case in front of Judge Leland Starbuck, who was known to be tough and wanted good reasons to delay a case. The state learned that their first request was only partly approved, and their second was completely rejected. Time was running out, and the hearing was approaching quickly. The hearing lasted 4 days. We shared our witnesses and presented our case. When it was finally over, Jim Parker suggested that I take a few days off to rest. I called out as I entered the condo, but there was no reply. I tried her cell phone, but still didn't hear back. I called her office and only got voicemail. I reached out to her family, but they hadn't heard from her in weeks. I also contacted some friends we both knew, but they seemed distant and didn't offer any help. It was almost midnight, and I found myself on the balcony looking at the dark waters of the Mississippi River below. I thought about how much had changed in my life. I rested my feet on the railing with a guitar on my lap. I played some songs, feeling sad about everything, especially about where Sandy might be. Suddenly, I heard the glass door open behind me. "What are you doing out here?" she asked in a flat tone. "Waiting for you," I replied. "Why?" she wanted to know. "Because you're my wife. I finished that case today and have the next 3 days off. I wanted to spend that time with you." "Just like that?" she asked. "You spent months not really noticing me, and now you show up saying it's all over and we can go back to normal." I thought about what she had said while I played a few notes on my guitar. Sandy was clearly waiting for me to respond. "I'm sorry," I finally said. "You keep saying that, but nothing has really changed." "How would you know?" she asked. "What do you mean, how would I know? You've been gone for most of the last few months. I've tried to spend time with you, but you weren't around. Nobody knows where you are. You don't answer your phone, and when I call your friends, they don't treat me well. So where have you been?" "Same as you," she replied sharply. "I've been at work. If you want to get ahead this fast, I thought I should do the same. But no one answers when I call your office because it's easier to work without all the interruptions." I nodded, looking at the slow river below. "I'm going to bed," she finally said. I was left there alone. I stayed on the balcony for 6 more hours until Sandy woke up, got ready, and left for work without saying a word to me. I spent the weekend alone, strolling by the river, enjoying drinks in quiet bars and playing guitar on our balcony. I had no idea where Sandy was, and she didn't want to tell me. The few times we were in the same room were filled with tension, as if neither of us wanted to break the silence. I had tried to talk to her on Thursday night, but it didn't go well. Our young marriage felt like it was close to breaking apart, and I didn't know how to make things better. Sandy didn't seem interested in fixing things either. On Monday morning, while I was busy working on a legal document, my secretary poked her head in. "You won't believe this," she said. "What is it?" I asked. "The district clerk's office just called. You need to see Judge Deuce at 2. Is that a problem? The decision is ready." I leaned back in my chair, unable to say anything. We had just finished the hearing 4 days ago. Usually, decisions like this took weeks or even months. They were hardly ever quick. The judge's quick answer made me worry it was bad news. The only reason he would come back so fast would be if he was turning down our request during lunch. I tried to sip my iced tea, but the disappointment and shame were hard to shake off. I had worked very hard on this case, wanting Napoleon Bonaparte Bonnaroo to be free again, and I thought that was only fair. With that in mind, I walked into the federal courtroom and finally reached the table in front of the judge, which added to my nerves. I was 10 minutes late because of a traffic accident. "Glad you could join us, counsel," Judge Deuce Starbuck said with a sigh. I looked up and mumbled an apology. The judge then smiled and said, "All counsel, come to the bench." Margie Lane, the attorney for the state, walked up confidently to the judge while I stood at the table, unsure of what to do. "Don't be shy, Mr. Roberts," the judge encouraged. The judge announced that the requests were approved. The papers were issued. Margie stopped and turned to look at me, her face showing surprise. She was as shocked as I was about her loss. Still in disbelief, I took slow steps toward the judge's desk, passing Margie, who stood there frozen. The judge pushed 2 large stacks of papers toward me. "One is for you, and one is for her. The original is with the clerk, who is already looking at these papers." I reached out and took both copies, feeling unsure of what to do next. "The marshal's office is delivering the papers to the warden now, and Mr. Bonnaroo should be out in a couple of hours," he said. "Thank you," I managed to reply. He simply shrugged. Finally, Margie spoke up. "Your Honor, we request that Mr. Bonnaroo not be released until—" "That's enough, counsel," the judge interrupted firmly. "Your request is denied. He will be released on his own promise to return. If you want to change that, speak to the circuit court." Margie realized she couldn't argue any further. The choice had come so fast that they were not ready for the outcome. I finally got it. I had done it. "A big win for my first case, and for the record, Mr. Roberts," Starbuck said as he stood up. "Great job. Too bad, Lee. This means you will probably have more cases like this." With that, he left the room. I turned to Margie, who gave me a hard look. I tried to hide my joy, but I could feel a big grin on my face as I handed her a copy of the decision. She took the papers without saying anything and declared, "This isn't over." Then she left the room quickly. I stood there for a moment, enjoying my win, even if it was short, before I took my briefcase and walked out. I had made it. I sat nearby, waiting for everyone to finish reading the decision. My boss, Harvey Fierstein, finished first. He was good in these situations and knew exactly what to look for when he was done. He put his copy in his lap and looked at me with a big smile. A few minutes later, Jim Parker finished reading the document. He put it aside and reached out his hand to me. "Absolutely brilliant, young man." I stood up and shook his hand. "Thanks." "No, Mark, I really mean it. I don't know how you did this. Maybe old Leland knows some people, but this decision is strong and it can't be challenged. It was written very well, and there's no way it was done in just 4 days. He must have been working on it for weeks. Even people with more experience would have hesitated." Harvey gave me a friendly pat on the back. "He's right. I doubt they'll even try to appeal." I raised an eyebrow, still not fully convinced. "Really, Mark, they're using taxpayer money. Their case wasn't strong, and they know it. I don't see how the higher courts let it go on for so long. Plus, the last trial wasn't handled well. Still, I think you've won. When will we find out for sure?" I asked. Harvey shrugged. "Best guess is by the end of the day tomorrow." "Why?" "If they decide to take this to the 6th Circuit, they will need to file a request soon to cancel the bail or set it really high. It won't take long. and they should submit it while they still have their lead. I nodded, thinking back to when I first met Knapp and the 4 days I saw him in court. He looked fragile and nervous, clearly not fit for prison, and I worried he wouldn't last long there. Just then, Parker's phone rang. Yes? There was a moment of silence. Okay, you call the press, and we're on our way. He hung up and turned to us. Bonnaroo is still at the county facility. They were about to move him this morning when they got the message from the clerk. The paperwork has been completed, and the warden has agreed to release Bonnaroo here. They've handled everything and sent it over to county. Let's go. Where to? Parker looked confused for a moment before bursting into laughter. Mark, this is big news. This man has been wrongly locked away for 10 years because of police mistakes and some poor choices by the courts. This is the big story for tonight's news. It will be on the front pages tomorrow. Do you really want to throw away this chance for good attention? We have a great opportunity to show everyone our new star. Then he paused and added, You know, it would be good if you kept your hair shorter, and please tell me you have an ironed shirt in your office. I shrugged and smiled. Sorry, boss. He can be the hard-working young lawyer who has been fighting for this unfortunate man, Harvey suggested. Parker thought for a moment and said, Good idea. Rubbing your chin makes you look like you've been working hard. Just try to look tired, okay? I nodded. Great. Now let's move quickly. The crowd will be here in 15 minutes and you need to be ready first. Jim and Harvey were right. When Jim, Harvey, Knapp, and I stepped out of the jail, we were met by a large group of reporters, photographers, and camera crew. Jim and Harvey held back, and Harvey gave me a gentle push toward the podium at the top of the steps. It seemed like jail releases happened often here, but it was new to me. The questions came at Knapp and me fast. Knapp did his part well. He looked nervous and relieved, not quite sure what to say. I felt like I did okay, too. As the excitement faded, I started to feel tired. I rubbed my eyes and touched my jaw, even yawning a few times. The press noticed and seemed to enjoy it. But then the questions changed in a way I didn't expect. Do you think the state will appeal? I didn't know how to answer. Have you talked about this with your family? I felt a little uneasy. No, we haven't, I replied. Still, one reporter asked, Mr. Roberts, if they don't appeal, do you think it's because they want to help you as family? If that's true, I said, then why did I need a hearing at all? No, sir. Governor Tolson is a good and honest man. He cares about the people, and I worked here for Mr. Bonnaroo. The public had strong support from Margaret Lane, who did her best to look after their needs. But the district court's decision showed that this situation should never have happened. It began long before Patrick Wilson became governor. Another reporter asked if there was some tension between me and my wife. I felt a weight from the question. I can only say that I've been at the office day and night for the last 5 months working on this case. I'm trying to help someone who is innocent. This has understandably put some strain on my young marriage. We've had to make changes and sacrifices. Yet, I love my wife and she loves me back. I want to thank her from the bottom of my heart for sticking by me during this time. Was it all worth it? Someone yelled out. I frowned and thought about my answer from earlier. I looked at Knapp, who stood next to me, looking confused. His mother, who seemed to be in her 60s but looked older, stood beside him. Her tired face told of a tough life, and her gray hair fell loosely around her shoulders. She gave me a gentle smile as tears streamed down her cheeks. It's not about whether it was worth it, I said, my voice thick with feelings while I looked at Knapp and his mother. It's about whether it was the right thing to do. And that answer is yes. Tears filled my eyes as Mama Bonnaroo stepped closer, wrapped her arms around me, and rested her face on my shirt. She felt so thankful, and when Knapp joined in, she hugged us both tightly. I felt the warmth of connection with others. Flashbulbs went off around us, but we didn't pay attention to them at that moment. I wanted to hold on to the feeling of having made a difference in someone's life. A real person who had been treated unfairly, but now had hope again because of me. I hoped that this feeling of happiness would help, as my marriage was going through tough times. Jim and Harvey wanted to take me out for dinner and drinks to celebrate. They knew Sandy would be busy for a while, and they didn't want to make my 2 bosses upset. I agreed. Jim kept saying how great I was, that group hug we had, all those tears. You're going to be on CNN for sure, he said. Harvey nodded in agreement. It felt perfect. We will be very busy soon, Jim said, rubbing his hands together as he thought about the new work coming in. When I got home, I found Sandy sitting on the couch. The lamp beside her was the only light in the dark apartment. I paused for a moment and looked at her. "Hey," I finally said. "Hey," she whispered back. I felt a bit nervous, unsure of what this meant. "I saw you on the news," she said, looking down at the floor. "Yeah, I won," I replied. She lifted her gaze to meet mine, and I noticed tears in her eyes. "They really needed help, didn't they?" she asked. "Yeah," I answered softly. My voice was shaky. They really needed help. He didn't do it, right? No. And his mom? She looked so sad and worn out. She looked at you like you were a bright spot in her dark day, like you were something good in a long time. I think she was just happy to get her son out of trouble. Sandy sniffed and wiped her nose with her hand. "Can you just sit here with me for a bit? Maybe just a little while?" She paused, waiting for me to move. When I didn't, she looked down at her lap. I didn't want to say it, so I said, "Let's just forget it, okay?" She looked back up at me, hoping I understood. I threw my jacket over the chair and knelt in front of her on the couch. "It won't happen again," I told her. "I promise next time they will ask someone else for help." She shook her head. "No, if this happens again, you do everything you can to help him or her or whoever." I feel so selfish, Mark. Like I'm being unfair. You're not being unfair. I honestly thought you were going to leave me. You didn't really want to come back home, and you were using this as an excuse to make it easier. When you finally moved out, I said, "I won't do that. We're in this for the long haul, right?" She looked at me again, like she couldn't believe me and needed some encouragement. "The long haul." I nodded, giving her a smile and a little shrug. "Well, at least until you get tired of me, right?" She chuckled through her tears, which made her hiccup a little. "Who says I'm not already tired of you?" Before I could say anything, she hugged me tightly until her tears stopped. For the second time that day, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. For a moment, I felt like a hero, like Superman. It felt like I had faced 2 big problems that day, and things carried on like that for the next 3 years. Life got back to normal. Sandy and I worked long hours, about 60 each week. We shared quiet evenings and relaxing weekends, and we both moved up in our jobs over those 3 years. Everything was going well again until Governor Truce decided he wanted to run for president. That was when I first felt really disappointed, not just by someone I cared about, but by nearly everyone I loved. The governor's mansion in Tennessee is a lovely red brick building in Nashville. One nice thing about being in charge is that you can live in such a grand place if you want to. But there is a downside to it. I wasn't sure how I would feel about all the tourists who walked through for tours. It doesn't seem fair to have such a big house if you can't have some quiet time when you want it. Anyway, Sandy and I were staying with her family at their big house. The people there were her parents, her 2 younger brothers, and my parents. That was everyone. So I knew something important was happening. Just then, Darlene, the middle-aged housekeeper, walked in with a tray of desserts as Pat stood at the head of the table. "I want to thank all of you for coming this weekend," he said, raising his glass of wine. We all joined in with cheers and lifted our glasses to take a sip. I chose to pass on the bread pudding, and Pat smiled at me. "Darlene, could you get him a glass of bourbon instead?" I looked at him. He seemed a bit nervous. "And one for me, too, if that's okay." She nodded and went quickly to the kitchen for the drinks. "I'm not really sure how to say this," he continued, putting his glass on the table but still standing. "Just say it, Pat," Dad encouraged calmly. His smile showed he knew what was coming. "Yeah, Dad, just tell us," Patrick Jr. added, looking a bit uninterested. "I'm going to run for president," he said, looking at us, as if waiting for our reactions. I wish I could say I was surprised, but I wasn't. It's common for politicians to aim for higher positions. If someone is a governor, the excitement wears off, and the next step for Pat was the White House. Deborah and I have talked about it, and we think it's now or never. The Republican candidates are not very strong right now, and I really have a chance. Politicians from the South usually do well at this level. Dad agreed with me. Pat gave a nervous smile. Let's hope that is true. He sat down and looked around the table until he noticed me. "What?" I said, more as a statement than a question. "I need everyone to support me in this." I nodded. Do you think I won't? He shifted nervously in his seat. You and my daughter. Is everything okay there? I was surprised. I looked at Sandy, who smiled back a little nervously, then at everyone else at the table. They were all looking at me like they were waiting for an answer. Why wouldn't it be? You two haven't had any kids yet? Deborah finally asked. That isn't my choice to make. I'm doing my part, I replied. Pat smiled widely. So I can count on you both to come to events looking happy together. Of course. I turned to Sandy. Right? She smiled brightly. Definitely. What was that all about tonight? A few hours later, as I got ready for bed in our guest room, I asked, What's going on? Sandy replied, yawning a bit. You know, the whole how's your marriage going thing. I said, It's important. They want everything to go well before the elections. She asked, Why do they think there might be problems? She shrugged, looking tired. I have no idea. I continued, You didn't say anything to them? She shook her head. Not at all. I told them we were really committed to each other. I asked, So you knew about this already? She smiled lightly. They told me when we got here. I didn't want to spoil the surprise. Did they ask about our relationship? I inquired. Yeah, and I told them we were serious about it. She came closer to me and I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Then I asked, Why haven't we started a family yet? She turned to me, resting her head on her hand. Because we've never talked about it. I replied, Is that really the only reason you want kids? She paused, saying, I'm not sure. We are always busy, I guess. Still, I thought we would have talked about it by now. Why not? Isn't that what most couples do? But we are not like most couples. I looked at her, trying to understand her face. She looked puzzled by my questions. Could we talk soon? Her eyes lit up with a smile. Of course. After my trip to Denver, we'll have a good talk about it. Maybe next Sunday. That sounds good. She hugged me and whispered, I really love you. Really? I whispered back. Really? She said, squeezing me tighter. An hour later, her words of love felt as fragile as a cup on the edge of a table. Sandy was no longer close. She had turned to her side, curled up and fast asleep. Meanwhile, I was wide awake, confused by the evening and by Sandy's strange answers to what seemed like simple questions. Realizing I wouldn't get back to sleep anytime soon, I quietly got up and put on a robe. Maybe a warm drink would help me feel better. As I quietly walked down the stairs to not wake anyone, I saw light coming from the study door. I moved closer and heard voices. You mean you never told him? Patterson asked. Of course not, Mom replied. Why not? He questioned. Because he wasn't the one who wanted this. Sandy was. What do you mean? He asked. He has liked her since he was very young, Deborah explained. But Sandy has always been a free spirit. She likes to be on her own. How did you get Sandy to agree to this? Dad asked. I felt a mix of anger and awkwardness. Deborah laughed softly. Honestly, we didn't. I just asked her to give him a chance, just see if there was a spark. At first, she wasn't sure because he's Steve's little brother. I encouraged her to at least try it for her dad's sake. If everything went well, it could help him in his job. It could be good for her, too. Someone laughed, and Pat said, Well, that worked out. She was unsure at first, but that Christmas, Deborah came back with a big smile. I thought things were going well. Pat laughed. I'm not sure, but she told me that night she believed she could be with him long enough to think about marriage. And maybe even a bit longer after that. Looks like she has him right where she wants him, Dad said, sounding amused. She's a nice person, Mom added, and he has liked her since the start. This really is his dream. There was a moment of quiet, and I felt my hands become tense. After a short break, Pat asked, So why has she stayed with him all these years? Is she really committed to him? She doesn't have other friends who might cause problems, does she? Deborah laughed lightly. I have no idea. She seems happy. Maybe she has just grown used to it. They have both been busy with their jobs, Mom said. Not much time to find someone new. So do you think they will stay together? Pat wondered. Mark isn't going anywhere, Mom said. And Sandy says everything is okay on her side, Deborah added. I heard glasses clinking. Then Dad said, Let's hope so, Pat. Even a small problem could change everything. You think so? I heard their footsteps as they began to leave. I pressed back against the wall, hiding in the shadows. I wanted to talk to them, but I knew that wouldn't turn out well. In my anger, I might only make things worse. I stayed there for a while, even after my parents and Sandy's had gone to their rooms. My mind was racing with thoughts. Now I understood Sandy's confusing replies. Her reactions to my feelings and her words of affection made me think about our future together. She seemed to see it like a big game, and that thought upset me. Then I realized something else. She acted like I knew everything, as if our marriage was more about reasons than feelings. If she had known that I didn't understand this, she might have been more careful with what she said. My mind was racing with so many thoughts that I felt lost. If this was just a game for her, did she have other people in her life that mattered to her? If she didn't really love me, then why did she seem so upset during that Bonnaroo case a few years ago? And why did she look so happy when it was all over? I couldn't find answers to any of these questions, not a single one. If she was seeing someone else, it was probably at work. Yet besides those few months during the Bonnaroo case, our relationship had its usual highs and lows. The quiet times were mostly because we were both working long hours, but it was still an arranged marriage. A marriage formed out of need, not love. Over time, though, my feelings had grown. I truly cared for her from the beginning. But did Sandy ever care for me? Did she start to care later? Or was she just okay with me being there? Did she feel angry with me? Suddenly, my thoughts about Sandy changed to realizing that my own parents made choices without asking me. They made decisions that shaped my life for their own reasons. How could they do that to their own son? I mean, really, how could they? On Sunday, I took Sandy to the airport for a work trip in Denver. Then I drove back to Memphis to finish some shopping and do laundry. I went to bed early, but tossed and turned all night, wishing I had said something to Sandy before she left. Maybe then the bed wouldn't have felt so empty. On Monday morning, I showed up at work feeling tired. I was worn out. I didn't know what to do. Should I call Sandy? What would I say? Hey, I've noticed that our marriage seems to be more about practical things. Do you really want to keep it going? She would probably look at me like I didn't get it. But that's how I felt. In the worst-case scenario, she might want us to stay together until after the upcoming elections. How could I say no if I felt happy? Did it really matter if it was true love? Should I just keep going along, hoping things would get better? Sandy seemed happy enough. We both looked content. Did it matter if it was true love? Did it matter how it all started? Arranged marriages happen often, both in politics and many cultures around the world. And she was lovely. Do you think Jack Kennedy married Jackie for true love? Not really. He married her to stop the gossip about his other relationships, even after they were married. He kept looking for connections outside their marriage. Jack Kennedy knew what he was doing. I didn't. But then again, Jackie didn't either. And history says she loved him, just like I thought I loved Sandy. Now, though, I wasn't sure if those feelings were still there. Mr. Roberts. I turned away from the wall and saw my secretary, Thelma Sanderson. She was carrying a tall stack of thick binders in her arms. Yes, Miss Sanderson? Do you want me to find a spot for these? I asked. I looked around my office. Sure. What are they? I inquired. These are all the books for your father's campaign team. Mr. Parker doesn't have any more room and asked me to put them somewhere for now. Since he's your dad, I thought this place would work, she replied. How long will they stay here? I asked. She shrugged as she bent down to stack the binders against the wall near some boxes I was sorting. A couple of days, maybe, she said. That's fine, I said, turning back to the wall. I wasn't sure why I was doing it. I stared at the walls for another 10 or 15 minutes. Those books seemed to be calling me. Jim Parker's team, along with some tired-looking accountants, always gathered over those books. I had seen them at the big table in the main conference room every few weeks, arguing and taking notes. I always believed I had left that behind, but my mind was tired from worrying too much, so I chose to check some books. I took 2 of them to my small round table. I opened the first one, which had the latest information for the first quarter. It was full of copies of election papers and other needed details. In short, it was confusing to me. I put the first book aside and opened the second one to find something different. This one had notes about campaign money matters. This was better, I thought. It had straightforward details about the law. It explained how to report a donation or an expense and how to describe everything without going into too much detail. This was important. Campaigns try to keep things private whenever they can. There's no reason to let a wrongly labeled expense cause problems when a reporter starts to investigate. About an hour later, on a quiet news day, I forgot my worries and the real tasks waiting for me on my desk. I found an interesting memo called Staff Support or Consultant. It was short, just under 3 pages. The first few lines caught my attention. They asked a question. How can we label child support payments to follow the rules without showing what they really are? As I read further, I discovered that regular payments were being sent to someone named Clarice Talbot. They had been sending these payments for 7 or 8 years, but new rules about labeling campaign staff payments had changed. The Finance Committee wanted to keep paying her, but didn't want to draw any attention under the new rules. After that, I went back to my desk and looked up Clarice Talbot. There were many results, but one name caught my eye from an old Washington Post article. It mentioned my dad. There was a picture of him at his desk with a young Clarice Talbot, his secretary, standing next to him while he signed something in his Senate office. I checked my father's Senate website, but there was no mention of Clarice Talbot there. I went back to searching through the records after 20 minutes of looking. I found an address where the checks were sent. They were going to a town in Illinois called Grant City. I recognized the name. It's about an hour from Chicago. I checked online again and found out that Clarice Talbot still lived at that address in Grant City. I didn't find any more information in the records or on the internet. I leaned back in my chair and rubbed my temples, realizing something big. My dad was sending child support payments to his former secretary. The only explanation was that I had a brother I didn't know about, who lived in Grant City, Illinois. Gradually, I felt the stress fade away, and I started to feel more at ease. That calmness grew as a plan began to form in my mind. I smiled, leaned forward, and started typing. When I was done, I printed the document and picked up the phone to call Human Resources. "Hi, Marcia," I said. "It's Mark Roberts. I just wanted to see if you were available." "What can I do for you, Mark?" she answered. "I need to drop off my resignation letter," I said, hanging up before she could say anything else. I left before any of the partners got back from lunch. That's how I ended up on that balcony. 8 hours later, back where it all started. I sold my car, closed my bank account, packed my clothes into one suitcase, and bought a ticket for the train. I watched the sunset and took one last look at the Mississippi River flowing below me. Then I picked up my guitar and suitcase, turned around, and left. I was going to find my brother and have a long talk with Clarice Talbot. I was taking the City of New Orleans train to start a new life somewhere else, somewhere far from the cold disappointments of people I thought cared about me. I felt so low that I couldn't even hum a song as I sat on that train. When I got to Union Station in Chicago, I quickly walked out the doors and headed down the street to the Atrium building. There was a train to Granite City leaving in 20 minutes, and I wanted to catch it. An hour and a half later, rocking gently with the train, I looked out the window and enjoyed the changing sights. I hadn't been back to Chicago since I finished law school, and I wished I had taken the time to enjoy a meal in the city. I could have gone to my favorite places, maybe even talked to an old teacher or met a classmate. Anything to remind me that I had a past and people who cared about me. Next stop, Granite City. The voice from the speaker said, "All passengers must get off at Granite City. Last stop, Granite City." I glanced around at the 4 other people in the car. They were strangers, and I would probably never see them again. At that moment, it hit me. I couldn't go back to Chicago and face the people I knew. This involved my dad's work in the Senate. They would be looking for me, trying to find out what I was doing. They would want to persuade me to return and do things their way. I smiled as I thought about them trying to understand everything. I was surprised that no one came to my house yesterday afternoon. I knew there had been calls, but I let them go to voicemail. Soon, they would realize I was gone. If not now, then when Sandy came home and saw that my clothes and my favorite guitar were missing, they would hurry to figure things out. That thought made me feel a relief I hadn't felt in a long time. It was time to start fresh. The important things were simple. I arrived in Grant City and found it small enough that I could carry my things to a hotel about 1.5 miles away at the edge of town. After a quick lunch nearby, I used cash from my accounts and money from selling my car to buy a decent used vehicle. Then I set off to find a real estate agent and an apartment to rent. On the second day, I moved my suitcase and guitar into a furnished one-bedroom apartment. I recently got my new driver's license and started driving around to find a job. Just before 11, I parked at a tavern on the edge of town. The sign outside said they were looking for a bartender. I hadn't worked in a bar since law school, but how hard could it be? A gin and tonic is an easy drink to make. The place seemed like it could use some good service. When I walked in, it took a moment for my eyes to get used to the low light. "Can I help you?" a voice said next to me. It was a big guy, maybe in his late 30s or early 40s, who was about 6'4" and weighed around 300 pounds. He was mopping the floor behind the bar. "Are you still hiring?" I asked. He waved me over to sit on a bar stool and set the mop down. "Name's Ferlin Fargo," he said. I hesitated, not sure if I should share my real name. "Mark Roberts," I finally replied. "Really?" Ferlin said, looking at my wrist where my watch was showing. "You sure about that?" I nodded. "Last time I checked." He paused and then asked, "Do you know how to bartend, Mark Roberts?" His voice made it clear he wasn't sure about my bartending skills or my name. I smiled. "Last time I checked, I had some experience." "Have you done this before?" he asked. "Yes, a little," I replied. "What do you mean, a little?" he pressed. "I worked in a bar for a while during college." "Do you know how to make a Rob Roy, a Manhattan, an old-fashioned, a margarita, and a daiquiri?" I nodded. "Then make one for me," Ferlin said. "Which one?" "The old-fashioned." I stood up, walked to the back bar, looked at the supplies, and took a highball glass. "Just tell me what goes in it," he said. "No need to waste good ingredients." "First, muddle some sugar with bitters. Then, stir in a shot of bourbon. Fill it with ice and top it with soda." "For the garnish?" "A cherry and an orange slice, if we have them." He smiled a bit. "We have those in the cooler, right?" I asked, pointing to the small fridge near the register. "Yep, we use bar sugar." "That's fine," I replied. His expression changed a little. "Where are you from, Mark Roberts?" "The South," I answered. "Where exactly?" I decided not to say anything and looked him in the eye. "Are you hiding from something?" "No, ex-wife, not yet." He looked at me for a bit, trying to figure out if I was being truthful. Then he shrugged, maybe feeling okay with my answer, and reached out his hand. $10 an hour? 10:30 to 6? Monday to Friday? You might get some hours on the weekend if you want them, or if someone can't make it. Do you think you can do that? What about tips? Tips are all yours. If you work with someone, you share the tips while you're together. You could also tip the waitstaff if they help you out, or maybe the busboy if he brings you drinks or ice. It's really up to you how you want to do it. I suppose that seems fair. Prices? There's a list by the cash register. If we have a drink special, it usually only happens on Friday or Saturday nights when there's a band or something. The prices stay the same. I shrugged. Seems simple enough? He laughed. We'll see. So, am I hired? I think so. When do you want me to start? Is now too soon? Am I dressed okay? I checked my outfit. Jeans, loafers with no socks, and a long-sleeved white shirt with my sleeves rolled up. Maybe it looked a bit nice. Do you need time to change? I asked. This works for me if it works for you. Works for me, I added as I reached out my hand. Thanks, he said, shaking my hand firmly. Don't take anything from me, Mark Roberts. I'll notice if you do. All right, not going to happen, I replied. Make sure it doesn't. He gave my hand a light squeeze while looking at me, then let go with a small smile. Welcome to the hitching rail. Happy to be here, I said. He pointed toward the area. See if you can clean this up before the customers come in 10 minutes. Okay, I said, picking up the mop and starting to clean. Thanks, I heard Ferlin mumble as he walked toward the back, probably going to the kitchen. Before long, the first customers arrived. 7 of them walked in, and then a tall woman with frizzy bleached hair rushed in just around 11:15. Sorry I'm late, she said, handing me her purse before grabbing a black apron and a notepad from the bar. We seem to have things under control, I replied, putting the last of the drinks on a tray. I'll take this, she said, her eyes looking over the drinks in the dining area. 2 cherries in this one. She pointed at a glass of Coke. Levon always wants 2 cherries. I added the cherries and placed them on top. I've got this now, she said with a happy smile, balancing the tray on her shoulder. Go ahead. After 2.5 hours, I was washing the last of the dirty glasses from lunch when the woman sat down with a big sigh. Wednesdays can get really busy, you know. Not really. She tilted her head, looking at me with curiosity. Who are you? Mark, when did you start? This morning. Her face lit up as she stretched her arm across the bar. Well, Mark, nice to meet you. I shook her hand and asked, And you are? She rolled her eyes like it was the easiest question ever. Debbie? Debbie, who is always running behind and still hasn't finished cleaning her tables, Ferland said as he waddled toward the bar. That's me, she replied, standing up. Come on, I'm just trying to be friendly. Be friendly after your tables are clean. Ferland Fargo sat at the bar looking tired. His thick black hair was wet and messy. He was sweating, and his shoulders drooped under his damp shirt. Water, he said softly. I quickly grabbed a glass, filled it with water, and put it in front of him. He drank it all at once, set the glass down, and asked for more. I refilled it, and he gulped it down just as fast. Thanks, he said, his breathing getting easier, and he seemed to get a bit more energy. Wednesdays can be pretty busy. Why is it Italian Day? I asked. Spaghetti and meatballs, ravioli, sausage and peppers. The kitchen gets really busy back there. Looks like a lot of people like it. It must taste good. He glanced at me, and a small smile appeared on his scruffy face. It tastes good. Plus, it's not too expensive. That's why it gets so busy. So not every day is this packed? He laughed. Oh, they are usually busy, especially since Debbie is always late for work. Always. Well, sometimes she's a little later, but not by much. Never on time. Not ever. I watched the waitress in the other room, balancing plates and humming a tune. The customers like her. They don't seem to mind when we're running late, but you, on the other hand, can't be late. Understood? For now, I answered, trying not to smile too much. What do you mean? The crowd doesn't know me yet, but they will soon. He raised his arms in pretend surrender. Great. Another dreamer. Just wonderful. I held in a laugh and kept cleaning. This was much better than just writing reports. After work, I drove slowly past 714 Madison Street. It was a small house about 35 feet wide, painted white with yellow shutters and a green roof. It looked neat, and the yard was well kept. Behind the thin white curtains of the front window, I saw a shadow moving toward the back of the house, probably the kitchen. I parked by the curb and turned off the car. What should I do now? I had found Clarice Talbot and my brother, but I didn't know my next step. My goal was to find them, and I had done that. But could I really just walk up and knock on the door? As I pondered this, another car drove by and turned into her driveway. Almost immediately, a little boy in a big football uniform jumped out of the back seat. He reached back, took a football helmet, waved, and closed the car door behind him. The front door opened, letting warm light shine onto the autumn grass. A woman stood there, wearing a tired smile. The little boy ran over, hugged her, and dashed inside without looking back. She shut the door behind him. That was her. That was Clarice Talbot. She looked a lot like in the old picture with my dad. But now she seemed tired and sad. Even her smile for the little boy looked a bit tired, but it still felt warm and friendly. What had Dad done? How could he do this so easily? My anger came back, and I hit the steering wheel in frustration over all the things I had missed. I was really upset. About 2 weeks later, I went to the hitching rail and saw my boss, Ferland Fargo, who often looked grumpy. "Take off your shirt and come with me," he said. I was surprised and asked, "Take off my shirt?" "You keep wearing those white dress shirts. I don't know how you haven't ruined them yet, but you're about to," he replied. "Doing what?" I asked. "Helping me move chairs and tables from the basement. We have a special event. It's the Lincoln County Women's Bar Association meeting. They meet every month. We host them 3 times a year, and it's our turn again today." I smiled at the thought. I get to serve a group of women lawyers, but Ferland warned, "You won't be smiling in a few hours. They can be hard to please and don't tip very well." I shrugged and began to unbutton my shirt while I carried tables and chairs. Ferland asked, "Why do you always wear the same thing?" "It's all I have," I replied. "Don't you have any other shirts?" he wondered. "Nope, nothing else." "Well, that works for here. Have you thought about getting some cheap ones?" "Not really." "Interesting choice," he said. Whatever. Furland always made us laugh. He wasn't old enough to be a dad, but he wasn't quite like an older brother either. He treated everyone the same, with a bit of joking but also warm moments of thanks. Debbie, one of our co-workers, looked up to him, even with him being much bigger and older. She always seemed happier when he was around. We all got used to his teasing. "So has anyone found you yet?" he asked, leaning against a table. "What do you mean?" I replied. "You know, your soon-to-be ex-wife. You seem to be hiding from her." "No one knows where I am," I answered. He nodded, looking worried. "What's wrong?" I asked, thinking about how tough it must be. "It sounds hard," he replied, "being away from home and around people you don't know. No family around." I smiled and wiped the sweat from my forehead. My brother had died in a car accident some time ago, and my mom and dad, well, they didn't get along too well, especially after my ex chose my mom's side. "It's a bit more complicated than that," I said. He nodded, understanding as I put my shirt back on. I helped Debbie serve drinks to the women from the bar association. Then I spent the next hour getting drinks and filling water glasses. Most of them didn't notice me, acting like I wasn't even there, but 4 of them smiled and seemed friendly, wanting to talk. One woman, around 50 years old, was wearing a snug sweater and a short skirt. She was lively and full of energy. When I got close, I felt a little uneasy with her excitement. At the end of the tables, there was a tall blonde woman, probably in her late 20s. She kept glancing my way, and when our eyes met, she tilted her head slightly, as if she wanted to know more about me. When she got up to go to the restroom, I noticed that she was slim. Some might say she was pretty, but she had a look that was special in its own way. The other 2 sat close together. One was shorter and thin, in her early 30s, with light skin and tired eyes. Her hair fell flat, just like her hunched posture. She seemed shy and often looked away when I tried to catch her gaze, and her smile seemed a bit forced. Next to her was the most eye-catching one in the group. I noticed her right away when she entered and couldn't look away until she sat down. She had a beautiful olive skin tone and smooth complexion, and her thick dark hair framed her face nicely. She carried herself with confidence, wearing stylish but not overly bright clothes. Her expressions showed that she knew what was happening around her, and her eyes were deep and interesting, drawing me in. I spent a lot of my lunch thinking about her. Before I knew it, everyone was leaving, and Furland was right. They didn't leave much for tips. However, the older woman did leave her phone number. Later that afternoon, I went to the bar and leaned back to get 3 Budweisers and a Leinenkugel from the cooler. "When you have a moment," I heard a voice to my right. I turned and was surprised to see the 2 women from the bar association. Pocahontas was the one talking, while her friend looked a bit shy and tried to hide on her stool. "Just a moment, ladies," I replied. I served the beers and went back to them. "Gin and tonic," Pocahontas said, asking for lime. I nodded and then turned to her friend. "And you?" She looked at Pocahontas and then back to me. "The same, please." I made their drinks, served them, took their payment, and gave them their change, all without much talking. A few minutes later, Mark Furland called to me from the corner of the bar. I walked over and leaned against the bar looking for empty glasses while Furland spoke in his deep, raspy voice. "Do you think you can work a double tomorrow?" he asked. "Terry's kid has a game." I shrugged. "Sure, it's a Friday, and those days are always busy for us. The fish fry keeps us lively from lunch until closing. I'm in." I stood up to keep an eye on things when Furland reached out and grabbed my arm. "Don't look now," he said softly. "But I think those 2 people over there are interested in you." "Really?" I asked. "Maybe it would be good to walk over and say hi, you know?" I felt a little nervous but nodded quickly. My smile faded. "I'm not saying you have to do too much," Furland added, trying to ease my tension. "Just being friendly can help." I tried to smile again and whispered, "Don't worry, I'll do my best." I spotted an empty beer bottle on the bar and said, "Excuse me," as I slipped away. "Hello, everyone," I said with a smile, looking around the bar. "Are you all set with drinks?" "We're good," the taller woman answered, making it sound more interesting than it was, but they seemed curious about me. I smiled back. The tall one raised an eyebrow while the shorter one looked a bit shy. "What are you curious about?" I asked. "Whitney, a friendly guy from the South, mentioned you," she said. I just love that sweet accent. Then she added, "We wanted to know your name." "Mark," I replied, wiping my hands on a towel before reaching out to shake her hand. "Mark Roberts." She shook my hand quickly and seemed a bit unsure. "I'm Rebecca," the other woman said, giving a firm handshake that felt warm. "Well, Whitney and Rebecca, it's nice to meet you," I said. "Thanks," Whitney replied softly. "The pleasure is ours," Rebecca added. "Where are you from, Mark?" "Just south of here," I answered. "We know that," she continued, "but we're really much farther south. When did you move to Granite City?" "A couple of weeks ago," I answered. "Where do you live?" she asked. "In an apartment." "Are you going to keep playing this game all night?" "What game?" I replied, confused. She looked at me for a moment as if she was thinking about something. It seemed like she was surprised that I wasn't giving her lots of compliments, but she didn't seem to mind. Then her face changed into a friendly smile. "Okay," Rebecca said with a grin. "I didn't mean to pry, we're just curious." "He's married?" Whitney pointed out, glancing at my left hand where the mark from my ring was still clear. For some reason, I couldn't look away from the pale woman. Her face showed different feelings: disappointment, relief, and a bit of sadness, as if she was going through her own problems. "Is that true? You're married, Mark?" she asked. I raised my hand to show the mark. "It's just a mark, not a ring." "Are you divorced then?" "Something like that." "Are you finished with it, or are you still sorting things out?" I shrugged. Whitney surprised me when she said, "That sounds tough, right?" I studied her closely. "I could say more than you think, but I figured I'd be wrong. Right?" Whitney looked a bit pale before she nodded slightly. Rebecca put her arm around Whitney's shoulders and gave her a comforting squeeze. "Stay hopeful, kiddo. There's so much more to life." Whitney gave a weak smile and said softly, "Sorry." I tilted my head. "Sorry for what?" "For having the same problems I do. My trouble started a little over a year ago, and you're still trying to figure it out. She's just struggling to find her way back." Rebecca said the few people she met recently haven't been very supportive. "What about you, Mark?" I smiled widely at both of them and put on a strong Southern accent. "Of course not. I'm a Southern gentleman, remember?" "Exactly," Rebecca replied, smiling back. Whitney seemed to brighten up a bit and gave a small smile. "Excuse me, ladies," I said, noticing some empty beer bottles on the bar, and walked over to clean them up. When I turned back, the women were leaving. "See you later," Rebecca said with a little wave. I waved back and watched them go, trying to stay calm despite a mix of feelings. Both of them were interesting in different ways, and they had captured my thoughts unexpectedly. The rest of the night went like the previous 14 nights. I parked down the street from Clarice Talbot's house, watching my younger brother get dropped off and rush inside. Then, I would go home to make soup and a sandwich and play guitar while watching TV. I still didn't know how to move forward. There was no doubt that little Skylar Talbot was my brother. He looked just like I did at that age, and probably like our dad, too. But talking to Clarice and stepping into her life and my little brother's felt like a huge thing to do. Still, I knew I had to take some action. Right now, I was content just watching the younger version of myself in his school uniform. As I got ready for bed, my mind drifted to Sandy. My parents and her parents had a tough history that I kept to myself, trying to stay positive. I felt a mix of emotions about Sandy, but once the shock faded, I began to think about our past more clearly. I remembered how she acted during the 3 months when I was wrapped up in my own issues. I started to wonder if she was going through something difficult at that time, too. The tricky part? I didn't know how I really felt about it. Did she think our marriage was in trouble? How much fault was hers? We didn't have a typical marriage, did we? This back-and-forth thinking confused me, even though she had done things that bothered me before. When she found out about my situation, she seemed to come back with real sorrow. After that, our relationship felt warm and caring, at least from my side. I often thought about our time together, trying to find signs that she wasn't faithful. To my surprise, everything in our relationship seemed calm and steady. Her moods and our plans felt like they got better, even after going through some hard times. In the end, I wasn't sure if Sandy knew I had questions about us. I remembered from the start how she said things that made it seem like I understood what our parents wanted for us, but she never said it clearly. She never said, "It's nice." Our parents wanted us to marry to support Dad's campaign, and I was happy we stayed together for more than a couple of years. This made me wonder if her comments were because she thought I knew everything, or if they were little hints I missed. Once again, I crawled under the sheets and stared at the ceiling, looking for answers. The next Thursday brought two surprises. Rebecca came by for a drink after work, and Whitney wasn't with her. "Do you want a gin and tonic with lime?" I asked as she got comfortable. "That sounds perfect," she said with a warm smile. After I ordered her drink, she asked, "So, Mark, what's your last name?" "Roberts," I replied. She looked thoughtful. "I think I've heard that name before. Are you famous?" she joked. I smiled and pointed around the bar. "I work here from Monday to Friday, 11 to 6. She seemed to think for a moment, her lips pressed together. Just then, I needed to grab drinks for a group that had just arrived, so I excused myself and went to help them. When I came back, I noticed Ferlin looking upset on the phone. He hung up angrily. "Is there a problem?" I asked. "Yeah, that band Golden Rodeo was supposed to play here tomorrow night, but their singer and bass player were in an accident last night. They have to cancel," he said, his frustration obvious. I frowned. "That's not good." "Definitely not," he sighed and added, "Management says all their other shows are booked too." I nodded, thinking about what to say. "I can play if you want." His expression changed from being unsure to surprised. Then he laughed a little. "Really? You?" That hurt a bit. "I'm serious. I can play the guitar, and I can sing too." "Have you done it before?" "Yes. I was in a band during college and law school." "Still in a band?" "Nope." "Is there any chance you could get them back together quickly?" I shook my head. "But that's okay. I can perform by myself." "What kind of music do you play? Anything you want to hear?" "Nothing too loud, right? That would be tough with just one person and a guitar." He nodded, folding his arms and tapping his chin. "What equipment do you have?" "I have an acoustic guitar. No amplifiers or microphones. The acoustic connects to speakers." He raised an eyebrow. "And you really think you can do this?" I smiled. "What do you have to lose? Let me make some calls. I think I can help you get some equipment, if you can find an electric guitar." "I want a Telecaster," I said. "You'll take what I can find," he answered, turning away to make a call. Then I saw Whitney sitting on the bar stool next to Rebecca. Whitney was looking at Rebecca's phone, which was buzzing with some news. When they both turned to me, Whitney's eyes grew wide. "You're a lawyer, Mark Roberts," Rebecca said. "A good one, too. You were even married to the governor's daughter and a senator's son," Whitney added, her curiosity growing. "So why is the senator's son married to the governor's daughter working here instead of being a lawyer in Tennessee?" Rebecca leaned back, waiting for my answer. I felt a tightness in my chest. "Well?" Whitney urged. Noticing I wasn't saying anything, I looked at both of them, unsure if I wanted to share. "It's a long story," I mumbled. Rebecca raised her eyebrows and Whitney asked, "Did your marriage end? And then you came here?" "Something like that," I replied. "They must know where you are," Rebecca said. I paused for a moment and then shook my head. "That sounds like a careless choice, doesn't it?" Her words hit me hard and I felt anger rise inside me. Careless, after everything my family and wife had put me through. "I don't know," I said tightly. "Want to share your story about how it was all his fault?" I almost wished I hadn't said that. Whitney looked surprised. Her expression changed from shock to sadness. Rebecca looked confused, her eyes jumping between us. "Hey," she said, putting her arm around Whitney. "Let's just take a breath." Rebecca shot me a look that showed she was surprised and didn't agree with me, but I wasn't going to back down. I struggled to keep my anger in check and turned away, starting to wash the glasses in the sink. A little later, I saw the door open and watched them leave. This time, I didn't feel excited. Instead, I took deep breaths to calm myself and focused on my work. Since the other side of the bar had mostly construction workers, I figured I wouldn't last long after the first drink was thrown. A few minutes later, I heard someone call my name. I turned to see who wanted a drink. It was Mark, one of the workers, and he was smiling a little. "What did you do that for?" he asked. I knew they were the only interesting ones around. I tried to smile and shrug, but it just came out awkward. So I walked behind the bar to prepare some drinks. When I got to the half-finished drinks left by Rebecca and Whitney, I almost picked up a napkin without seeing what was written on it. "You're right, I'm sorry." That made me feel even worse. The construction workers really reminded me of that as I finished my shift and headed home. The next afternoon, I still felt down as I waited for work to end, hoping for some quiet time. I was deep in thought when Ferland tapped on the bar. "Yeah?" I asked. "Come on," he said. "Debbie will handle the bar while we're gone." I wondered, "Where are we going?" He replied, "To pick up that equipment you need." "Oh, no," I suddenly remembered. I had completely forgotten about him coming. He tapped me gently when I was standing there, deep in thought. I tossed the bar cloth on the counter and followed him. 10 minutes later, we turned onto a long gravel road and drove toward a house that looked nice, but wasn't very old or new, big or small. On the right was a tidy lawn with some old oak trees dancing in the wind. At the end, there was a simple barn. As we parked behind the house, the back door opened and a man stepped out to greet us. I thought I recognized him. He approached with a big smile and shook Furlong's hand when he got closer. "Hey, Furlan, Coop." They exchanged friendly pats on the back. Then the man turned to me and smiled. "Hey, I'm Teddy Cooper." I smiled and nodded. "Of course, Teddy Cooper. You're the singer and guitarist for General Beauregard," I said, shaking his hand. "Come on," he said, leading us toward the barn and calling back to Furlan. "Why don't you back the Jeep up to the shed?" I followed him while Furlan got back into the car. "You can choose," Teddy said as we walked into the barn. He turned on the lights and they lit up a whole set of instruments, drums, guitars, keyboards, and more. Everything was there except for the light show. We practiced here a lot before going on tour. "Are we in your way?" I asked. He smiled and shook his head. "Not at all. We got back about a month ago. We're all taking a break while Nick, Will, and I make some new songs." I nodded. "Do you know what I need?" "Sure, I've been there before," he replied. "Come on, help me out." Teddy and I lifted some amplifiers, cords, a small mixing board, and a microphone with a stand. "Which guitar do you want?" he asked, as we took a moment to rest. "Whatever you have. Do you have a favorite Telecaster?" He pointed to the guitars lined up. "Pick one." I looked around. There were 3 Fender Telecasters next to some Les Paul, a Paul Reed Smith, a Gretsch, and 2 Rickenbackers. "Are these all yours?" I asked, feeling a bit jealous. "Some belong to Nick." "Does it matter?" "What he doesn't know won't hurt him," he replied with a raised eyebrow. "But if you're okay with it..." He laughed and picked up a white Telecaster. He walked over to some cases, opened one marked Nick, put the guitar inside, and closed it. "I'd really rather not," said Teddy, interrupting. "He won't mind. This is the best one. It's made just for him and sounds amazing. If you're doing a solo show, you might as well use it, right?" I thought for a moment and then nodded. "Thanks." "So you're coming tonight?" Furland asked while I put the guitar in the Jeep. "Probably around 8:30. I need time to get ready." "You don't have to rush," he said, but his look made me pause. It was the 10th time someone had given me that look today. "You won't get it right in that place." "I've been there before. I can help you get ready fast." "All right." He smiled and opened his arm. "Great. I'll see you then. Thank you. Anytime." Furlan chuckled to himself for most of the trip back to work. "What's so funny?" I finally asked seriously, Mark. "I know you recognized him, but you didn't even seem surprised. It was like nothing to you." "I've met famous people before," I said. "Really? Like who?" "Well, I thought I met the president and some important leaders. Once I even played music with Alan Jackson, who is pretty famous. But I didn't say that." "Just famous people," I replied. "You acted like it was no big deal, but you looked nervous when he offered to help you." "I just didn't expect it," I said. "I mean, he probably has better things to do, right?" "Nah," Furlan said. "Jenny and the kids are away. He's probably bored right now." I stayed quiet for most of the drive back until we pulled into the parking lot. I asked, "How do you know Teddy? Everyone here knows him." "Most of the band does, especially Teddy and Nick. I graduated a year before both of them. We've been friends for a long time." "Do they still live here?" "Teddy never left. Nick came back when Ledford broke up and General Beauregard started." "Wow." He parked the Jeep, turned it off, and looked at me. "If you pay attention, you'll notice more than just them." "What do you mean?" "We're not too far from Chicago," he said. Close enough to enjoy the city, but far enough to feel like we're in the countryside. Many famous people live around here. Like who? He named a movie director, 2 authors, some coaches, and players from the Bears, Cubs, and White Sox, among others. They all live nearby, all within 10 miles. He smiled. If you drive down a country road and see a long driveway going into the trees, it might lead to someone famous. Wow, I thought this felt a bit like being back in Nashville. No wonder people seem so relaxed here. I felt really nervous about Teddy Cooper watching me play and sing. Teddy kept his word. 20 minutes after he arrived, everything was ready, and the amps were set up. He showed me the effects pedals by the microphone, then gave me a nod, wished me luck, and went into the crowd to get a drink. Many people greeted him warmly, stopping to chat along the way. I heard a thud on the small stage to my right, and Ferland said, "Move over, son." I stepped aside. He crouched under the mic, switched it on, and checked it was working. "Listen up," he said to the crowd in his deep voice. "A few members of Golden Rodeo can't perform tonight, so Mark here has agreed to step in for them." There were some playful cheers and laughs, and it was hard to tell if they were teasing or just joking around. It was probably a mix of both. A few people looked genuinely upset that Golden Rodeo wasn't playing. Just wait. Lou Ferland called to a big man with a short haircut and his wife as they walked toward the door. The man stopped. He decided to give this new singer a chance and thought about letting him play at least 2 or 3 songs before judging him. "All right," the man said. "I'll give him 2. Sounds good." He then turned to the audience and said, "Now, let's give a warm welcome to someone new performing here tonight." The applause was louder than I had expected. Ferland came closer and whispered in my ear, "I want you to do your best. Understand?" I nodded, and he gave me a bright smile and a friendly pat on the back. I smiled back as he stepped off the stage and disappeared into the crowd. I then turned to see about 60 eager faces looking back at me, ready for anything. I felt a mix of excitement and nerves. Instead of feeling scared, I grinned and began to play the introduction to a song I thought would be a good start. After about 20 seconds, I moved closer to the microphone and sang the first words with confidence. I left Oklahoma feeling a bit overwhelmed, driving my car toward Arizona, and maybe even to California where everyone seemed to be so happy. At first, the crowd was calm, but soon I noticed some people beginning to tap their feet. By the time I got to the musical part after the first chorus, they were cheering and clapping. Even Lou went to the bar with his friend for more drinks. That's when I realized they were cheering for me and wouldn't turn me away. I took a quick break at about 10 to 11, and the place was buzzing with energy. "Need a drink?" Ferland shouted over the noise from my right. I shook my head and said, "No thanks. Just water," I added. He smiled, gave me a thumbs up, and went through the crowd to the bar. As I moved toward the door to get some fresh air, people stepped aside to let me pass. A few patted my back and gave me kind words, while most chatted and enjoyed themselves, eager for the break to end so they could dance again. "You're really good at this," I heard someone say softly next to me, a hand resting on my shoulder. It was Whitney, the shorter one with pale skin. I gave a tired smile. "Thanks. Are you going outside?" I nodded. "Can I come with you?" "Sure." She made her way through the crowd, set her drink on the bar, and followed me outside. I looked up at the stars, enjoying the cool air that felt refreshing. I meant what I said. She spoke louder than the night around us. The sudden quiet after the noise felt strange. "I'm really sorry about what I said yesterday." "Me too," I said. "I went too far. I deserved what I got." I didn't say more. I just took a moment to relax. The quiet started to make her a little uncomfortable. "You're really talented. You know a lot of songs," she said. "I used to play in a band back in school. Why did you stop?" "Life got busy. Getting married and starting a job took over. That can happen sometimes." She nodded. We stayed quiet for a little while, and I glanced over at her. She was staring at the stars, deep in her thoughts. I wondered if I was right about that. "Am I?" I asked. She turned to me, her face serious. After a moment, she nodded. "I'm divorced, and it was mostly my fault." I was curious. "How did that happen? Do you want the quick story or the long one?" I glanced at my watch. "Share whatever you can in the next 9 minutes." She sighed and looked back up at the sky filled with stars. The quick version is that I was unfaithful to him. The long version is that we probably shouldn't have gotten married. Why not? I asked. Because I never really loved him deeply. Her words struck me. A chill ran through me. I did care for him, but it was more about respect and admiration. He is a good man, smart, kind, and dependable. He had all the qualities a husband should have, but... I encouraged her. But what? She paused, searching for the right words. There was never a real connection between us. Then why did you marry him? I asked. At that time, it felt like the right choice. I was in my mid-20s, and getting married seemed like the next normal step. But why him? He was easy to be around, and things never got too serious. She looked at me with sadness, and it made things harder for me. We had a little boy, which helped me keep going for a long time. She smiled softly at that thought. My job kept me busy too, but soon I started to worry about coming home. It wasn't about him. It was about me. Besides our son, we just didn't have much in common. We wanted different things and didn't share any hobbies, except for our son, Kyle. She agreed. Have you ever talked to him about this? She shook her head. It's better if he thinks I was just unfaithful, that another man came between us. That feels unfair. Her face changed to show determination. If I told him how unhappy I was for most of our time together, he would lose all those happy memories. What do you mean by that? Think about it, Mark. When you look back on your marriage, you remember the happy times, right? The moments when you both enjoyed being together. I stayed quiet. I was beginning to see things in a new way. Sandy's feelings seemed confusing. She looked at the stars as she spoke. Luke thought about all the happy years we had together and just a few tough months. I didn't want to take that happiness away from him. I felt it was the right thing to do. I didn't want to ruin his good memories. And he didn't see what was really happening. He picked the easiest answer. I thought about this, realizing that Sandy might be right about her situation with Luke. But for me, I started to question my own memories. It felt like everything had been turned upside down, and now it all looked different. I wasn't sure what the truth was anymore. It's time for you to head back, she said, bringing me back to the present. I looked at my watch. Yeah, I replied, leaning in to give her a friendly hug. I'm sorry again. She tried to smile and then turned back to the stars as I walked inside. Teddy Cooper stopped me as I made my way back to the stage. You're doing great up there. Thanks, I said, feeling good about myself. Do you have anything special? You mean something I wrote? He asked. Yeah, I shrugged. Sure, why not play a couple of them? I looked at him and then back at the crowd, who were starting to leave the dance floor. I'm not sure they'd want to. Just one or two, mix them in, he urged. Don't tell them it's yours. They won't know unless it's not that good, I replied. He chuckled. Yeah, there's that. I shrugged. I'll see what I can do. When I got back on stage and set up my guitar, I looked around and spotted Whitney coming back to find her drink. Rebecca handed it to her, and they both turned to face the stage. I glanced at Whitney and picked up the acoustic guitar. I put a capo on the second fret and leaned closer to the microphone. There are some nice ladies by the bar without anyone to dance with. I'll play something in about 10 seconds, and I hope someone will ask them to join in. Then, I got ready to start playing. I watched as Rebecca laughed and walked over to them. Whitney looked a little shy. Then a tall man in his 40s stepped up to her and offered his arm after a brief pause. She took his hand and went with him. I played my guitar, and most people quickly recognized the song. I could see her singing softly with her head resting on the man's shoulder. I noticed her lips moving when I got to the chorus. Winter, spring, summer, or fall, all you have to do is call, and I'll be there. Yes, I will. You've got a friend. That was great, Ferland said as he stood behind the bar, counting the money. You brought them in and kept them here. Just amazing. I took a sip of my beer, my first of the night, while Marla and Denise cleaned up, moving a big trash can around for the empty bottles and cans. I took another sip and smiled tiredly. It felt good. I hadn't played in a long time, and I missed it a lot. The music, the crowd, the energy of playing for people at the bar was so much fun. When you could connect with people and play the songs they enjoyed, it helped them forget their problems for a little while. That's what I had done tonight. I didn't want to stop, but Ferlin finally came onto the stage at 1:40 a.m. to announce one last song before everyone had to go. "You hear me?" he said, standing right in front of me. I said, "Sorry," as I turned to look at him. I asked, "How much do you want for playing tonight?" I shook my head and replied, "Nothing." He answered in a quiet, serious voice, "It doesn't work that way. You made me a lot of money. Thanks for helping me out earlier. Without you, this place would have struggled." I just shrugged and said, "It's no trouble. Don't worry about it." He slid $400 across the bar to me. "It's a bit less than I'd pay a full band, but you helped me out." I looked at the money and then back at him. "I don't want it, Ferlin." "You're taking it?" he asked. "No, I'm not." "Yes, you are. Take the money," Denise called out. "He won't leave until you do, and we need to get home." I looked at Denise and then at Ferland, smiling big. "Stop it," Ferland said. "So you two?" I asked. "We used to be married," he said quietly. "We're trying to work things out," I asked softly. "Really?" "I can hear you both," she said sharply. "And no, we're not trying to get back together. We just need to figure things out." I chuckled. "What's so funny?" Ferland asked. "Nothing. I just think it's, well, different," I replied. "Different how?" he asked, looking serious. He didn't seem to find anything odd about going home with his ex-wife to talk. "You really don't see it?" I asked. "No, I don't." I laughed a little, then reached for the money. "How about this? I'll take half and you keep the rest. But you must return the equipment to Teddy tomorrow." I left 2 bills on the bar. Ferland looked at them for a moment before putting them in his pocket. "Sounds fair. By the way, Teddy wants you to call him tomorrow." "What for?" I asked. "Didn't say." "Do you have his number in the book?" I asked. "Under Jenny's name?" "Jenny Cooper." I finished my beer. "All right," I said. I got up, grabbed my guitar and its case, and headed home to relax. I woke up around 10:30. The first thing I needed to do was call Teddy Cooper. A younger person answered the phone, but Teddy joined the call quickly. "Hey, Mark," he said. "Good morning. Ferland told me to call you about those 2 you played last night. They're yours." "You saw them?" I asked. He laughed. "Of course. Was it that obvious?" "Kind of," I replied, my voice becoming slower. "What's going on with them? How many more do you have?" "I have a couple dozen," he said. "Can I see them?" "You're joking, right?" "Nope. Nick and I would like to take a look." "Why?" He paused for a moment and then said, "They're not completely finished. The 2 you played, anyway. They need a bit of work, but I think they have something special." I felt a mix of pride and disappointment. I thought they were done for a while, but I also didn't really think they were that great. Teddy continued, "I think either Nick or I could help you finish your songs." I felt surprised. Teddy and maybe Nick wanted to help me complete my music. "Are you still there?" I replied, "Yes, I'm here." "Do you want to record the songs?" I asked. "Not really our thing," he said. "But we know some people who might be interested. We have an agent who wants to meet both of you." "So, what's in it for you? Do you get paid?" I asked, curious. Teddy looked surprised by my question. "If we help, we get a share," he said. I thought about that. "That seems fair," I said. Teddy added, "It won't be a 50-50 split. You've done most of the work." "How will that work?" I asked. "Not sure yet. We'll figure it out together. It'll depend on how much each of us contributes to each song." I considered his offer. I could say no, and my songs might never be heard, or I could say yes and maybe find success. "When do you want to meet?" I asked. "What?" he replied. "When do you want to meet?" I repeated. "I'll contact Nick and get back to you later this week." "Okay? That sounds good to me." After I hung up, I looked at the phone for 5 minutes. The ideas were exciting. I could change my job and maybe make a name for myself. I could see lots of people cheering, everyone coming to see Mark Roberts perform. But then, that excitement went away, and I grabbed my keys to go buy groceries before the football game. I stood at the deli counter, waiting for my potato salad, coleslaw, and cheese to be wrapped up. I heard a voice behind me say, "I thought you were a churchgoer." I turned around and saw Rebecca Galarza. "Hello?" I nodded and gave her a friendly smile before looking back at my groceries. Before I could walk away, Rebecca bumped her cart into mine. "You were really good last night," she said, smiling brightly. "Really nice." "Thanks," I replied, Is that what you did in Memphis when you weren't busy helping people and being a great young lawyer? You were also a well-known country singer. No, I haven't done that in a long time. Not in front of a crowd, anyway. Is that why you came to Grant City? Because it's a place for musicians? You want to leave the past behind and make it big in music. Her playful eyes and teasing voice showed that she was having fun. It made me smile. I looked at her in her comfy, faded jeans and t-shirt, and I couldn't help but feel happy. Are you checking me out, Mr. Southern gentleman? I laughed. Sorry, but you make everything look good. Really? Definitely. You're quite charming. I do my best. You really do, she said with a raised eyebrow and a playful grin. When you remember, too. Do you have any plans for today? I paused, then replied, Sorry, but I need to go somewhere important. A look of disappointment crossed her face, but then she brightened up again. Maybe another time. I wasn't sure if she'd stop by again. She had visited about 6 times since I started at the hitching rail, always having just 2 drinks. A gin and tonic with lime before leaving. I had only chatted with her a little bit, but I'd seen her with the other people around. She was attractive, but also nice and down to earth, unlike some who can be stuck up. She was mostly happy and fun. She smiled a lot, rarely looked upset, and seemed comfortable being herself. I said, placing my hand on her card, I really need to meet someone today. It's important to me. That's okay, she replied with a smile, her happy mood coming back. I looked at my shopping cart and then back at her. I started searching for the right words. What I need to do today won't take too long. I just need to get ready some meals for the week. It shouldn't take too many hours. Are you asking me out to dinner? She joked. I felt a bit nervous, and she quickly added, Because if you are, then the answer is yes. Just tell me the time and place, and I'll be there. I'm not sure where to go around here. I don't want to go to the diner on my day off, and my place isn't really set up for visitors yet. I'm still unpacking. It was furnished, but not the best kind of furniture. So it really felt like a single person's place. You know, like in college? Yeah, I haven't seen one of those in a long time, she said, rubbing her hands together. Can I please invite myself over for dinner? Her excitement made me feel better. She had such a lively spirit. I'll make dinner, I said. I'll bring the drinks, she replied. Wine? Beer? Something else? Your choice. I don't drink much. That's fine. She looked at what I had in my shopping cart. What are you making for dinner? Sandwiches? Yeah, I really like sandwiches. Sandwiches? She smiled. Sounds perfect. Give me your address and I'll come over. I gave it to her, and with a happy wave, she went back to her shopping, humming a tune. Clarice Talbot sat alone on the edge of the bleachers. The other parents, who had known each other for a long time, chatted easily, hardly noticing her. She had moved to Grant City just 7 months ago with her son, Skylar. Her simple clothes and tired expression didn't seem to invite a chat, so she jumped a little when I sat down next to her and asked, Is it okay if I join you? She scooted over and nodded. I've seen you sitting alone a lot, I said, smiling kindly. Kind of like me, she replied, trying to smile but looking a little tense. Are you new here too? Yeah, about a month, I said. I relaxed and looked out at the field, spotting Skylar right away. He was a halfback, smaller than most boys in his position, weighed down by his gear like the others. That's your boy, right? I asked, pointing. The one with the ball? She said, her eyes following him as he ran and got tackled but still managed to move forward a bit. I thought so, I said. You look a bit nervous when he has the ball. She turned her focus back to the game, looking serious. So, I wasn't imagining things? You've been watching me? She asked. Not like that, I said with a laugh, but it's hard not to notice. We sat alone and caught each other's attention. She gave a light laugh. Tell me about it, she said. I'm Mark, I introduced myself, holding out my hand. Clarice, she replied, shaking my hand for a moment. How long have you been here, Clarice? Just a couple of months. Me too, I said. So we're both new here. It seems that way, she agreed. Where did you move from, Mark? Memphis. What about you? Washington, D.C. Do you work in government? I did, she smiled. Now I'm finishing my degree at Chadwick, and you? I work at the hitching rail. She looked surprised to hear I was a bartender. And Skylar? I asked, wanting to keep our chat going. How old is he? Almost 8. I nodded and turned my gaze back to the field. We watched the game quietly for a long time. With only a few minutes left in the fourth quarter, the visiting team started to make a move. They were down by 4 points, but they still had a chance to win against the Grant City Generals. The parents were getting nervous, wanting to add more excitement to the game. A light rain started to fall, making the chilly day feel even colder with only a minute left. The other quarterback got ready to throw. Little Skylar, playing safety, found a way to get in front of the ball as the player tried to catch it. He then ran down the field. Suddenly, I felt someone grab my arm. It was Clarice. Her eyes were focused on her son as he dashed toward the end zone. The other parents cheered, and I smiled, watching as Skylar was stopped just past the middle of the field with 1 minute to go. His team started to celebrate. The crowd was loud, and I stood up to cheer for him. Clarice, though, looked strangely relieved when he got up after the play. "He's okay," I said. She looked at me and then at her hand still on my arm. Looking down, she apologized. "I just worry sometimes." "He made a great play," I told her. "At least he helped save the game." "Yeah, that's true," she replied. "He'll make more friends because of this, right?" "For sure. That's good." She said this, then pulled her hand away and looked down. She turned back to the game, and I took that chance to step away from the bleachers. I understood what I needed to know. Clarice and her son were facing their problems alone, and it was clear she was worried about him. When I opened the door, a strong smell came out, and her face showed she was curious. "I thought you were making sandwiches." I smiled a little and said, adding a touch of Spanish, "You know, Mexican sandwiches." "I know what those are," she replied as she walked into the apartment. "I just didn't expect that. I thought it would be something more ordinary." I took the bag from her hand, peeked inside, and put the drink in the fridge. I figured that choice was safe since you said you don't drink much. Rebecca called from the doorway as she looked around the simple room. Simple was really putting it mildly. There was an old couch and a coffee table, both looking worn out, and a small TV with a DVD player in the corner. My guitar was on a stand next to a music stand. In the dining area, there was a small table with 2 chairs and nothing else. No decorations, just a clock on the microwave. "You've really lived here a month?" she asked. "Yep, this is it. Home sweet home." "But where is your furniture? Even college dorm rooms had some decorations." I laughed and led her down the hallway. "It's not fancy," I said as I opened the door. She looked inside and paused in the doorway. There was a neatly made bed on the floor with sheets and pillows, an alarm clock, and a stack of books beside it. The closet door was partly open, showing several white shirts and a few pairs of blue jeans hanging inside, with some socks and underwear neatly folded on a shelf above. 3 pairs of shoes were lined up on the closet floor, brown shoes and 2 pairs of white sneakers. "What do you like to do when you're not working?" I shut the door and answered, "I eat, sleep, and play guitar." "Really?" she said with a playful nudge. "Sounds like you should eat more and play guitar a little less." "I think you're right," I replied as I walked back to the kitchen. I went over to the small pots on the stove and gave them a quick stir. One pot was cooking meat, and the other had onions sizzling in butter. "It smells really good," she said. "I'm making my version of a Mexican sandwich with sweet onions and cheese." She took in the wonderful smells of beef, garlic, herbs, and a dash of wine, then enjoyed the scent of the buttery onions. "Are you a chef or something?" I pointed to a cookbook on the counter. "Just a book about fancy sandwiches. You know, from the cooking shows." "So you really love sandwiches?" I smiled and opened the freezer, which was packed with labeled containers filled with different sandwich ingredients. Every Sunday I make some fillings and freeze them. During the week I grab some bread and cheese, and that's all I need. Usually I have soup with my sandwich, like vegetable or tomato. Sometimes I grab one of those pre-made salads. She laughed. "Classic bachelor," she said. I smiled and asked her, "Have you ever heard of Warren Zevon?" She shook her head, looking a bit lost. "He was a singer and songwriter, one of my favorites. About 10 years ago, he found out he had cancer. When they told him, they said he might have 6 months to live. He had smoked for a long time and had other problems, too. I remember they asked him what he would miss the most. And you know what he said?" She shook her head. "Sandwiches," he said. "I really like sandwiches." After he passed away, they made a tribute album of his songs with other artists and called it "Enjoy Every Sandwich." It made me think. I really like sandwiches, too. Still, Rebecca said that it's every meal. What can I say? I replied with a smile and a shrug. He had a good point. I really love my food, and I don't want to look back later and wish I had tried more dishes. You should definitely eat more, she said, gently poking me. Do you really think I'm too thin? I asked while I opened a bag of fresh bread rolls, slicing them and putting them on a plate. It didn't surprise me. Guys sometimes got praised for their looks. I always felt like I looked more like someone who worked in an office. I'm just joking, she said as if she could read my thoughts. I looked in the fridge, finding 2 bottles of soda and some potato salad. Does it make me, I don't know, not very attractive? Should I be doing something about it? I gave her a hopeful look as I opened the drinks and handed her one. I just wanted to know. Should I start exercising? Do you think that would help? I took a drink, and she sipped hers while thinking about what to say. Turn around, Rebecca finally said. I looked at her for a moment before turning away. I added some meat and onions to the rolls and sprinkled on some cheese. I asked as I opened the potato salad, "Can I turn back now?" I felt her hand on my shoulder, and it made me feel better as she leaned in a little closer. Maybe I was being too careful. Maybe, I said. Probably, she replied with a smile. I turned back to her, feeling glad. Just let me know when you're sure about it, okay? She raised an eyebrow and looked at me closely. Suddenly, she stepped a bit closer and we shared a quiet moment. After a moment, Rebecca took a deep breath and spoke softly. Come on, she said, taking my hand with a kind smile. Let's go. She led me toward the bedroom and I followed, feeling both excited and a bit unsure. Once we were there, she turned to me, looking playful yet gentle. Just let me know if I'm getting too close, she said, teasing me with a grin. I stood there, unsure of what to say as her smile said so much. She looked sure of herself, but also kind. Do you trust me? She whispered, taking a small step closer. I nodded, feeling a strong bond between us that was warm and exciting. Let's take our time, she said softly, reaching out to hold my hand. After a short pause, she smiled to make me feel at ease as we stood close, but still gave each other space. The air was filled with a sense of understanding that didn't need any words. It was a special moment when we didn't have to talk. Just being together felt perfect. Mark, you're wonderful. I paused and looked at her, unsure if she was joking, but when she stepped closer, her gaze was full of kindness, and I realized she meant it. This is special, she said softly, her voice warm. She held my hand gently, looking up at me with eyes that showed a lot of emotions. The bond between us was clear, and everything felt important. It was as if time had slowed down just for us. You don't know how much this means, she said softly, gently touching my arm. Her honesty touched my heart, and I smiled, feeling warmth spread through me. So, does this mean we're on the same page? I asked, lightly brushing my fingers on her shoulder. She looked into my eyes, her own sparkling with hope. We shared an understanding that went beyond words, and she moved a little closer. We both knew this moment was special, more than just what might come next. It was about the trust we had in each other. She smiled sweetly, still holding my hand, and the silence between us was filled with understanding. There was no rush to talk. Just being together felt right. She leaned in a bit, her eyes focused on mine, showing the strong bond we shared. I placed my hands on her back, feeling a warm comfort between us. We shared a moment that felt special without needing to say a word. After a bit, she leaned in closer, her face near mine. Our breaths mixed as she gave me a soft kiss, kind and gentle. I held her tight, feeling our connection grow stronger. I noticed her breathing speed up, and I could feel the energy around us. My hands stayed on her back, keeping her close as we enjoyed this meaningful time together. Just a little more, she whispered, her voice full of feeling as she leaned in even closer, slightly shaking from the bond we were sharing. I held her gently, steadying her as we felt a closeness that needed no words. She leaned back a bit but kept her hands in mine and softly said, "You're truly amazing." I smiled, feeling very happy and connected. I leaned my head back for a moment, cherishing what we had shared. "Really?" I asked. "Absolutely," she replied. Feeling happy by the honesty on her face, I wrapped my arms around her in a warm hug. It felt nice. The soft fabric of her shirt brushed against my hands as we enjoyed a quiet moment together. "This is perfect," she said softly. "What?" I asked. I liked being close to her. "Do you really enjoy cuddling?" she said, playfully nudging me. "Not everyone likes moments like this, especially after everything." I didn't say anything back. I just wanted to hold on to this warmth a bit longer. 15 minutes later, we sat at my small dining table having dinner. We both wore comfy, casual clothes. "This is really good," she said after taking a big bite of her sandwich. "It tastes even better warm." I nodded. "You're right. I think I'll make more warm sandwiches from now on." I smiled and took a bite while watching her. Finally, she asked, "What was that all about earlier?" She shrugged. "You seem like you could use some comfort." I wanted a break too. I thought about this for a moment. Then Rebecca asked, "Was it okay for you?" That was an understatement. I replied, "Of course. I hope I didn't come on too strong." She seemed a bit unsure as she said this. "Not at all. You can take the lead whenever you want." "How do I look?" she asked. "You think I'm perfect, right?" I smiled, remembering how close we had been. "Pretty much perfect," I joked back, thinking about our earlier conversation. "I didn't really get a good look. Everything happened so fast." "Like what?" She raised an eyebrow and smiled. "You know, the little things," I said. She laughed and replied, "Little things and more." She shook her head and giggled, and I smiled back at her. We enjoyed our meal in a comfortable silence. After we finished eating, I took the plates to clean up and got us both drinks from the fridge. "Why me?" I asked playfully. "Because you're cute," she answered. I raised my eyebrow, waiting for more. "You're like a puzzle," she said, taking a sip of her drink. "You're cute, but quiet. You can tell that you just went through a rough time, and it seems like you don't feel very sure about yourself. I saw a chance to take my mind off things and to remind you that you don't need to feel this way." I thought for a moment and nodded. It felt like a nice gesture. Her eyes narrowed a bit as if she wasn't sure if I was joking. "Your confidence surprised me when I noticed that. You're also really good at talking." I found myself interested, so it was more than just a kind act. She seemed sincere, not just saying nice things to make me feel better. For once, a woman was being serious with me, and I remembered how long it had been since Sandy had really connected with me, instead of just going through the motions. Then I remembered that Sandy was still my wife. I let my head drop to the table and stared at the beer label in front of me. In a soft voice, I said, "I'm not divorced yet." I could see her focus on me from across the table. "But you said at the bar that you're not wearing a ring." When people asked if I was divorced, I would say something like that. "But in Tennessee, I'm still married. I ran away, and that part is true. But we haven't even begun the divorce process." Rebecca's face changed from confused to understanding, and then to disappointment. "So what's really going on?" she asked, her voice full of worry. I took a deep breath and looked at the wall behind Rebecca, trying to stay calm. I wanted to explain this without showing too much emotion. The girl I like is named Sandy. I've liked her for a long time, at least since middle school, but she always liked my brother. They were together the whole time, and I was just watching from a distance. She was kind to me, but her heart really belonged to Stevie, my brother. I let out a small laugh. Honestly, she probably didn't even notice me much. "Why didn't she marry him?" Rebecca asked. "He passed away a little over 8 years ago," I replied. "He died in a car crash." I looked at her and saw a serious look on her face as she leaned in with her arms on the table. They tried to bring us together. I turned my attention back to the wall. A year and a half later, our parents decided that Sandy and I would be a good match. Did they suggest it or push us into it? They really planned everything. "You mean they set it all up?" Rebecca said, leaning back in surprise. "Why would they do that?" "Votes," I replied. "Sandy's dad was running for office, and it looked good for him to have us together. But your parents, why would they agree?" "Pretty much the same reason, I guess. It was also a big favor to the governor. He would owe my dad and Sandy's dad, and you knew this and went along with it?" I held her gaze. "I found out the weekend before I left." She still looked unsure. "You never suspected anything before that?" "Not like this. It's hard to believe someone would do that to their own son without telling him." "How did you find out?" "I just did, okay? Are you sure it's true? Absolutely. You didn't hear wrong. I accidentally overheard something I shouldn't have. Our parents were talking about it. And you really didn't get it mixed up with Rebecca? I asked. I'm a lawyer, so please believe me when I say I know what's going on. Sorry, she said quietly. It's just so weird. I mean, an arranged marriage. I shook my head. It's only partly arranged. She agreed to it, knowing all the facts. They offered me a chance to follow my dream, and I got caught up in the whole plan. Did she know you were confused? I smiled. That's a good question. That's what really matters. Rebecca tilted her head. So you don't really know for sure? I shook my head. I'm still trying to understand why it matters. She thought about this for a moment and said, There's a big difference. If she knew and you didn't, she might have taken advantage of you. I shrugged. In the end, it still wasn't a real marriage for her. But it was real for you, right? Yes, until I discovered the truth. She sat back, lost in thought. Do you understand what I'm saying? I asked. It's not just that I'm divorced. It feels like I never really had a true marriage. But you cared for her, she replied. Didn't she feel the same? I shook my head. I was just a friend to her for a few years. Are you sure that's all? She asked. I'm not completely sure, I shrugged. It might be more complicated, but I don't think it really changes much. How do you mean? She pressed. Some things she said. I used to think she was just joking. Now I look back at those comments differently. So when you heard that conversation, you just walked away? No, I said, staring at a spot on the wall. It took me 2 days. She leaned in closer. Tell me more. Something must have happened in those 2 days. Did you learn anything new? Not really, but I have a feeling there might have been other people in her life while we were together. I don't know the full story or how many there were. Then what changed for you? My dad, I said, leaning forward and resting my hands on the table. She paused for a moment before gently covering my hands with hers. I found out that I have a brother. There's a young boy that my dad's team is quietly supporting. The woman's eyes got bigger when I told her. I nodded and said, Yes, he is right here in Grand City. His name is Skylar, and he looks a lot like me. He also looks like his mom, who used to work for my dad. I want to help you find a way that works for everyone, she said, lightly tapping her fingers on the table as she thought about it. So, you came here to find him? She asked. I nodded again. What do you plan to do? She wanted to know. I admitted, I'm not sure yet. She leaned back, lost in her own thoughts about my search. I don't want to upset this boy's life. He doesn't deserve any trouble, no matter what's going on, she said, her voice full of care. I stayed quiet, thinking about her words. I had first thought about telling everyone what my dad did, but I didn't want to hurt anyone more. I guess the main question is if your mother knows about this, she asked. She paused for a moment before speaking. Probably not, I said. She looked at me closely. Are you sure? Pretty sure, I replied. If she knew anything, I would have sensed it. She wasn't good at hiding her feelings. That made me feel a bit stronger. Rebecca then asked, What do you want from this? I shrugged my shoulders. I just want to bond with my little brother. I'm not looking for revenge. I just want to let go of all this trouble and start anew. Everyone? She said, with curiosity in her eyes. I'm sorry, I mumbled, looking down. I didn't mean to suggest anything else. She moved closer and softly lifted my chin. I might have been a bit much, but that's okay. Feelings can make us say things we don't mean. In those moments, it's hard to show our true feelings. I didn't mean to, I said. No, it's fine, she said gently. This isn't something we should dwell on. It feels different now. It's not what it seems. I don't see my current situation the same way anymore. It feels like a part of my past, I added. She smiled at me kindly. I get how hard that is. I really hope you find comfort as you keep going. What they did to you is truly terrible, and believe me, I've heard many awful things. I nodded. So, are you just going to stay up here and do nothing? Rebecca asked after a moment. What do you mean? You need to take some action. Coming up here was just a reaction. Now you need to actually do something. How? Start by getting a divorce. I paused and then said, But I'd have to do it in Memphis. I haven't been here long enough. She smiled. Wrong, Mark. This is like a poker game. If you don't do anything here, what will you do? You want to take it there? You really think her father will let her do that with all those reporters around? I don't think so. I smiled for the first time in a while. There's more, I said. Her father is trying for the White House, so he'll want to keep this quiet. I felt my body relax and sank deeper into my seat. I didn't know how stressed I was until that moment. Now I felt lighter and happier than I had in a long time. Even when Rebecca asked her next question, it didn't take away my relief at having a plan. There was just one more thing to think about. What would happen if she didn't agree? Are you really ready to share everything? It might not just impact her father's job, but yours too. I smiled and said, she won't resist. Just the threat alone will make her back down. She'll do what her father tells her. Are you sure? Rebecca asked. Absolutely. But later, I learned I was mistaken. I was very mistaken. Early Tuesday morning, I sat in the office of Taylor & Galarza, the law firm. At 10:10, the receptionist opened the door and Whitney Patterson saw me. She tried to smile and waved me in. I hesitated, but then stood up and followed her inside. I thought Rebecca was handling all of this, I said. She passed it on to me, Whitney explained. If you're not okay with this, please tell me now and we can set you up with someone else. We went into a small office full of papers and folders. Rebecca mentioned working together. Change that. Whitney sat down at her desk and motioned for me to sit across from her. Did she tell you this? Whitney nodded. Yesterday afternoon, after the meeting was planned, she noticed there might be a big issue. What do you mean? Because lawyers can't have personal connections with their clients. That breaks the rules. I thought about it and nodded. Okay. How long have you been a lawyer? I've been a lawyer for 9 years and I've worked with divorce and civil law for the past 7 months. Before that, I was a prosecutor. She raised an eyebrow as if inviting me to ask her more about her experience. I shrugged. All right, this should be simple. That's what Rebecca said. She knows best. What do you mean? Whitney frowned a bit as she thought about how to respond. Finally, she decided to be honest. She was on the other side during my divorce and pointed out what needed to be said, so she has a lot of experience. She says this should be easy. She worked for your ex-husband. Whitney nodded, a small smile on her face. And now you work for her. I'm a good lawyer, and they needed someone who knows how court works. But you're friends with your ex's lawyer. Kind of odd, right? But she was nice to work with. She acted professional and helped everything go smoothly. You know about my divorce. How could I blame her for suggesting what a judge would probably choose? I just looked at her, surprised. Lawyers are certainly different. So, Whitney said after a moment, picking up a pen and getting ready with her legal pad, are we ready to start talking about your case? I nodded. I spent the next half hour answering her questions. After that, I left with a form to fill out about my money situation. I also made another appointment for Friday morning to sign some papers and get things started. That night, Rebecca and I had dinner together. We enjoyed Cuban sandwiches with tomato soup. Rebecca stood next to me, leaning against the counter while I pressed the sandwiches and warmed the soup. I was talking to Whitney, saying, "Oh, I see, you told her most things." Rebecca replied, "Yeah, pretty much, but you didn't say why you came here. It's about your younger brother." I stirred the soup and thought for a moment. Does she really need to know? I think so. And you didn't tell her? No, I wasn't sure if you'd want me to. Then why bring it up? Because I want you to tell her yourself. And what if I don't? Then I won't say anything, that's for sure. I looked at her. Her warm brown eyes seemed to see right into me. I know this is hard for you, Mark, she said softly. I don't want to pressure you, but you should be ready. Your lawyer isn't ready either. I nodded. She was right. Still, I wanted to keep things to ourselves. Let me think it over. Okay, that makes sense. I finished making the sandwiches, poured the soup into bowls, and took mine to the table with Rebecca right behind me. She dipped her sandwich in her soup, took a bite, and chewed slowly while watching me. What's up? I asked after she swallowed. She smiled. Just because my last name is Galarza doesn't mean you have to make Latin food when I'm here. I laughed. Come here, I said, taking a bite of my sandwich before getting up to check the freezer. I opened the freezer door and she looked inside. From left to right, I said, pointing at the containers of frozen food. Sunday to Saturday, we have Mexican beef ribs, shredded chicken from last night, pulled pork for tomorrow, and so on. She looked at me and chuckled softly. You really have a plan for everything, don't you? What can I say? I replied as I closed the freezer door. I'm a lawyer, and I like to stay organized. She just shook her head and went back to the table. We finished our meal and then went for a walk, talking comfortably. We didn't mention anything beyond simple chat. It was clear. We wouldn't get too close until the divorce was done. After Rebecca left, giving me a friendly kiss on the cheek, I almost called Whitney to move things along. But I hesitated. I knew they had talked about me and what had happened with Rebecca. If I looked too eager, it might push her away. This made me think more about Rebecca. She was in her mid-30s, smart, funny, and strong. Yet she had never been married. Why? That question kept coming back, and I didn't know the answer. Can I ask you something? I said to Ferland Fargo while I cleaned up the bar after lunch. Sure, he answered, still looking at his newspaper. You're divorced, right? Yep. So what's dating like for a divorced guy? It's tough. Why is that? He looked at me, thinking about it. It's like this, he said slowly. For guys like us, being single again doesn't mean there are lots of people who want to date us. You're, what, 30? 32? He nodded. I was 36. The problem is, women in their 30s usually fall into two groups. They are either divorced or not interested in marriage. Not interested in marriage. They don't want to get married. And when they are dating, it often feels complicated. Things don't become serious before they end, or they just can't be serious at all. I added that they're too independent and don't want to be with anyone. Exactly, he said, putting the paper down and leaning in. And the divorced ones can be tricky too. How's that? You have to find out why they divorced. Was it because of money problems? Were they too demanding? Hard to please? It's not always the woman's fault, I said firmly. The same could be true for their ex-husbands. He smiled and nodded. Exactly. That means they might be very cautious. The worse their marriage was, the more disappointed they felt, and the more they might view every man negatively. I thought about this, then asked, why did you and Denise split up? He shook his head with a sad expression. That was my fault. I was always busy with work. Then why do you still see each other? We care about each other. She's the one for me, always will be. But for her, it's hard. She cares, but she struggles with my long hours away. I work late and only have a few hours on weekends. It makes having a family or marriage difficult. Have you thought about slowing down? His smile was a little sad. Sorry, buddy, but that's just how I am. It's like asking a leopard to change its spots, he continued. She knew this from the beginning. It didn't start like that, but that's how it became. But you still get to spend time together when you can. We just aren't married anymore. That's really sad. Yeah, he sighed. If only I had listened to what Ferland said. Solving one problem didn't really help when I still had many more problems waiting for me that I wasn't ready to face. I had to think about what life would be like after a divorce. Take Rebecca, for example. She was a year or two older than me, a kind person, and still single. She had never talked about any serious relationships, which was strange. Most women my age, like my secretary, my wife, and others I knew, often shared stories about their past relationships, even if just to vent a little. But Rebecca never mentioned anything like that. Was she too strong to think about marriage? Or was it just not something she cared about? Did it even matter to me? We had one special moment together, and I could count our deep conversations on my fingers and still have some left over. Yet I felt a connection with her. She was the first person I truly connected with since I realized that the life I had lived for over 7 years was not what I had expected. I felt a bit nervous that she might be my best chance at finding happiness, as being alone seemed closer than ever. Then there was Whitney. She was having problems in her marriage, and I sensed she might never really be happy. Did that mean she could find joy again? Did she panic at the first sign of trouble? I didn't think about love with her, but I worried. She showed one side of what being divorced could be like. I often saw another side of the divorced experience with two women who had been unhappy, sometimes for good reasons. They believed that all men were unkind. They often shared their feelings about men loudly, looking at any nearby men as if daring us to disagree. I wasn't interested in discussing that kind of thing. The most troubling situation was Ferland and Denise. You know how some couples get divorced but still care for each other deeply? It's hard for a new guy in a woman's life because he often gets compared to her ex, and he usually doesn't measure up. Time can help those who are hurt to move on, but some people hold on to the past and can't move forward. Is that fair? Fairness doesn't really matter, that's just how life is. By Friday morning, I agreed with Rebecca. I needed to take action. So I went in, looked at the papers, and signed my request to end my marriage, along with a few other forms. Later, I shared a little about my younger brother with Whitney. She listened closely, and when I finished, she asked if everyone down there was mean. On Sunday afternoon, I spent 5 hours with Teddy Cooper working on what I thought was my best song. By the end of his feedback, I felt really down about it. "Is this it?" he asked, questioning my work. "Yes," I replied. "I changed it to this," he said, playing a different set of notes that changed the sound. "Sure," I replied. "It does sound better. Do you think it really works?" "It will if we add a special note here," he answered, then carefully improved the music step by step. By the time we finished a couple of hours later, parts of my original music were still there, but they were hard to recognize. Next, we spent an hour fixing the words. It was exciting, but also a bit frustrating to watch him work. His ideas came quickly and were always good. In the last hour, we focused on a section of the song he thought needed changes. He was right, and I had tried something similar before. He looked at what I thought was a good idea and said, "This is close, but let's adjust the words and the music." When I was about to leave just before 6:30, I felt like I should hurry home and make changes to all my other songs before he had a chance to go over them. He must have seen I was worried because he placed his hand on my shoulder as I stood by the door. "Mark," he said, "you're really talented. Maybe not the best yet, but you have a real gift." "Thanks," I replied, getting ready to leave. He gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze. "You know, the songs Nick and I write usually take a lot of time. Sure, sometimes we finish one quickly, but most take days or even weeks. Some can take months or years before we get back to them with new ideas." I nodded, but still felt unsure. "In just one afternoon, you've created something that's almost ready to share. It needs a bit of work, but I want Nick to hear it and think about it. There's something special about it. That's really impressive." I looked at him and said, "It feels almost like a different song." "No way," he replied. "Same words, just a few changes. Same music. Just a little improved," I added, "and the same melody with maybe a few notes changed." I shrugged. "But I would never have thought of those changes." He smiled back at me. "This is my job, man. I do it every day. You get better at things when you practice a lot, right? I hope so, because right now I feel a bit lost." He let go of my shoulder and lightly tapped my arm. "Don't worry, you'll get better, just wait and see." "Okay," I replied, picking up my guitar case and heading to the door. Once I was outside, I stopped and turned back. "Hey, Teddy." "Yeah?" "Please don't show Nick my song until I'm there." "Why's that?" "I want to see how he feels about it, too. It'll help me get better." "Sure thing, man. No problem. When he has some time, I'll call you and we can plan something." "Thanks. Next week, then? I'll see you then." I waved goodbye, still feeling a bit unsure. On Monday morning, Furland came over and asked if I could perform again next Saturday night. Same time, same setup, just like before. It seemed the Golden Rodeo was still not ready. "Sure," I said. "Great." He answered and pulled out 4 posters for my upcoming show. I really hope you don't turn them down after I worked hard on these. On Wednesday night, I was at Rebecca's house while she was making dinner. Whitney was there too, but everything felt nice and calm. "So what will you do when all this is done?" Whitney asked. "I don't know. I'll probably keep bartending for a bit." "Isn't that boring?" she wondered. "No, I like it. I don't have to think too much, and it's nice to be with people who aren't always dealing with big problems." "You might get bored, though," Rebecca said. "Once this is over, I think you'll last about a month. Then you'll be standing there wondering, 'What am I doing here?' Just trying to meet new people," I joked. She looked at me and smiled. "You're funny." "But still," Whitney said, "you don't want to go back to your old job." "I don't have a driver's license in Illinois, and I'm not going back to Tennessee. Never." "What about teaching?" Rebecca suggested. "I'm not sure. I've never tried it." "That's not a bad idea," Whitney said. "Chicago has a lot of law schools, and there are some nearby too," Rebecca added. I laughed. "Really? Can you see me talking to a classroom full of excited law students about rules or agreements?" "Actually," Whitney said while thinking, "I can picture it. Just keep it professional," Rebecca said. "With your experience, I bet one of those schools might want you if they have open jobs." I shook my head. "I don't think so." Whitney took out her phone and started typing. I'm going to call around tomorrow to see what's out there. Is this part of your job as my lawyer? She smiled at me, and Rebecca said she knows what it's like to go through hard times. Sometimes you just need a change, even if it's not the best for you. She wants to help you avoid problems that many of our other clients have. Did that happen to you? I asked Whitney. She shook her head. No, but that was only because Rebecca saw me looking sad one day after I left the state's attorney's office. She helped me stay on track. Do you do this with your other clients? She feels thankful to you, Rebecca said. So she's working extra hard. Thankful to me for that song you played a few weeks ago. The one where you said you wouldn't play until someone asked us to dance. Well, someone did ask her to dance, and now she likes him. I looked at Rebecca and then at Whitney, who smiled shyly. He's her favorite too, Rebecca said. Stop it, Whitney said. Oh, come on, you know it's true. Whitney looked from Rebecca to me and said, So far, so good. Is he the first guy since the divorce? She shook her head. Just the first one who isn't just looking for something quick. I placed my hand over hers. Well, that's great. She squeezed my hand and said, It gets better, Mark. I promise. You just need to be patient. I still hadn't talked to Clarice Talbert, but both Rebecca and Whitney were pushing me to reach out to her. Feeling a little nervous, I decided to go to her house. We had sat close to each other during 2 games, so I wasn't a complete stranger. That Thursday night after work, I went to her front door and knocked. Clarice looked surprised when she opened the door. I started to ask, Do you have a moment to talk? But she quickly shut the door. I was shocked. Then I heard her voice inside. Yes, he's here right now. There was a pause. No, I didn't tell you that. What was happening? I started to think they must have found out I was there and were probably close by. On the other side of that phone call, I quickly got into my car and left. I was puzzled about how they found me. The next morning at 7:30, Whitney called. She had been served. She said, At your place last night around 9. Not the night before. I asked for clarification. Last night, she repeated. 9. Thanks, I replied, then ended the call. I decided to let the day go on. It was almost 11 when I got back from my break. The crowd looked mostly the same as before. A lot of people were enjoying the lively atmosphere in the dance area, and it was busy at the bar. I played some new songs, but no one seemed to mind. After being in a cover band for 5 years, I had a big collection of popular songs from the last 50 years ready to go. Whitney was there with her friend from last time, and they were clearly focused on each other. Her friend was good-looking, maybe 7 or 8 years older than Whitney, with a few gray strands in his short hair and sharp eyes. He seemed to notice everything, which suggested he might have a job where paying attention was important. Rebecca sat with them and danced sometimes, accepting invitations from others around her. They danced happily, filled with laughter and lots of fun turns and spins. Teddy brought his wife, and later, Nick Harlan and his wife joined us. When I met Nick during a break, he said he wanted to check on his guitar since he had been away. He also mentioned he would come by more often. I started the second set because Whitney asked me to sing You've Got a Friend. It was apparently her song with her new friend. I think slow songs sound better when you play them in 2s or 3s, so I took off my capo and was about to begin Change the World when I noticed someone sitting right next to me. It happened so quickly. One moment I saw a group of people, and the next she was right there in her bright yellow blouse and tan pants. She looked a little nervous, but hopeful. I quickly put my capo back on at the 5th fret and started to sing, keeping my eyes on her. I sang about wishing her love and happiness. I truly wished her all the best. I hope you don't make the same mistakes I did and fall for someone like you. Because if you felt like I do, you would walk around like a little kid. But kids don't really know. They can only guess how hard it is to wish for someone's happiness. I sang the whole song while looking at her. By the time I got to the 2nd verse, her eyes were filled with tears and she looked a bit unsteady. When I finished singing and the last note faded, she turned and mixed in with the crowd. I didn't see her again that night. It was hard to stay focused, but I did my best. I played until closing time and then stayed on stage until most people had left. What's wrong? Rebecca finally asked. Sandy was here, I answered. Her eyes narrowed and she smiled like she understood something. It made me think that I really didn't want to run into her while dealing with my cases. The next day, Nick Harlan worked quickly to finish Sweet Marlene. This was my first chance at success. He also suggested that we play the song faster, and then he played and sang it about twice as quick as I had thought it should be. That was it. Teddy agreed with him. I just didn't see it that way. I nodded along, but I didn't really feel anything. I tried to focus on the next song. We worked on a touching tune that felt right at a slower pace. They were surprised when I suddenly disagreed with their changes and made the lyrics deeper and more meaningful. They both liked how it turned out. The song had much more feeling that way. Then they shared a knowing look, especially Nick. It was a tough spot to be in. "Yeah," I said, "just make sure you never have to go through that again." I looked at him, impressed that he understood my struggle so quickly. His calm expression showed he had faced tough moments before and knew exactly what to say, even without saying much. I joined in, paying close attention to their ideas. Being with someone who understood me felt nice for some reason. As I finished my shift on Monday night, I couldn't help but think about Saturday. One moment she was gone, and suddenly she was right there. "What are you doing here, Sandy?" I asked her. She paused, looking unsure of what to say. "I was looking for you, Mark." I let out a small laugh. "Why am I getting in the way of your dad's big plans for president?" She looked down for a moment, then back at me. "Yeah, Mark," she said, trying to keep my gaze but struggling. "You are getting in the way of my dad's plans, but that's not why I'm here." "Then why are you here?" I asked. "To say I'm sorry. Apology accepted. You can go now. And to win you back," she said. I tried to hide my doubt, but it seemed clear from her face that I wasn't doing a good job. "Really? Win me back?" She nodded, her face showing she was searching for the right words. "You have every reason to be upset with me, Mark. I know that. Daddy must be worried about this, right?" She sighed, feeling frustrated. "I know what you think, Mark, but you don't know everything. That's where you're wrong, Sandy. I know it all. Okay, they didn't tell me their little plan before we got married. I only found out a couple of months ago when I overheard our families talking about it during my break. Remember that weekend at the governor's mansion?" She nodded. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Ferland. "Why don't you two sit in the dining room?" he said. "I've already set up her salad there, and you can talk in private." "Sure, Ferland," I replied, still glaring at Sandy. I turned and walked to a table in the far corner of the dim dining room, away from the few other occupied tables. Behind me, I heard Sandy say, "Sorry about this." "It doesn't sound like I'm the one you need to convince," Ferland pointed out. Sandy followed me to the corner of the dining room but stopped before she took her seat. I could see that she didn't expect me to be angry about everything that happened. But I wasn't happy about it either. I drummed my fingers on the table. My knee bounced up and down, and I kept looking away. I stared out at the mostly empty parking lot. Finally, Sandy sat down and took my hand. But when she touched me, I quickly pulled away. "Just eat your salad, Sandy." She looked down at her plate. "I know you don't believe me," she said softly. "Honestly, I wouldn't believe me either, but I'm telling the truth. I want another chance. Not for my father or his campaign, but for me. For us. That's all I want," she added. I looked at her, my words sharp. "Yeah, you have a lot of history. Do you really want to be with me for real this time? Does that mean you won't leave again, or are you just hoping the baby is mine?" She held back her tears. No one had ever spoken to her like that, and she found it hard to stay calm. She tried to look strong, but instead, she stared at her salad, pushing the lettuce around. "I thought you knew," she said softly. "Knew what?" I asked. "That our marriage was just to help our parents. It wasn't meant to be serious. I thought they told you." "Well, they didn't." "Okay, I understand now. My mom only told me that a few weeks ago." I leaned closer to the table, my eyes focused and my voice urgent. "You really couldn't tell? You thought I was just pretending this whole time?" She paused, trying to find the right words without making me more upset. Taking a deep breath, she decided to be truthful. "Not a good idea," she said. "I thought we used to joke about you. My friends and I did when you weren't around. You were so sweet and caring. We even compared you to a puppy. I just thought everyone believed you were trying to win my heart for real." Frustration heated my face as I struggled to keep my voice down so others wouldn't overhear. "You laughed at me for wanting to be a good partner. for hoping you would love me. I really thought you cared. I felt like the luckiest person in the world, but you just saw it as a joke." Tears started to fall down her cheeks. "I see that now. I feel so sad about it. I really get your feelings. But that doesn't change what happened. You treated me like just a friend all those years while you lived your life freely. You and your friends made fun of me and looked down on me. Now you think I should just accept that? Do you really believe I should say, 'Oh, it was just a mistake. Let's move on'? Do you think I can trust you now that I know the truth? You really think it can be that simple?" Sandra wiped her tears with her napkin, trying to calm down while I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. My anger was fading, replaced by a growing disbelief. Her next words took me by surprise after about a year and a half, maybe 2 years. "I thought about everything, not just this one moment, but everything that happened over time. I noticed how you treated me and how happy you looked. And you know what? I realized that I really wasn't the brightest one around." She shook her head. "No. I began to see that I was truly happy. I loved being with you and looked forward to coming home each night just to relax together. I thought you were trying hard to make everything great, but that didn't matter anymore. You made it real, Mark. I realized I had fallen for you and felt happier than I had ever been with anyone else. When they made their rude comments, I told them to stop. I said you were wonderful and that we were really married and in love." "Why did it take so long?" I asked, leaning over the table to look at her. "I just wanted to know. And why did you think you needed to be with someone else?" "You don't. While I was trying hard to take care of everything at home and help someone in need, why did you pick someone else?" "Let me explain," she said, her voice rising with frustration. Some people nearby turned to look at us, but I could only manage a weak smile. "Okay," I replied softly. "Go ahead and explain." "You have to remember Mark," she continued, her tears drying as she focused and urgently asked for my understanding. "I thought you cared about this as much as I did. I thought they had talked to you like they talked to me. Just go along with this. If later you want to find a real partner, you can do it. We can make it work. That's what I believe they told you, but I never did anything to make you think I was leaving. Sandy, I never did. That's not true, Mark. Everything that happened made me feel like you were moving on. Made me feel like you had found someone new. I don't believe that. Try to see it from my side, Mark. Imagine being in my shoes. After 3 years at the same job, you come home late every night. You work on weekends and long hours. We barely spend time together anymore. You knew something was wrong, though. I told you many times. No, I only knew what you told me. I wasn't sure if it was all true, but it felt deeper than that. You started to drift away. You had important cases before, but you rarely spoke about this one. You only said you were helping someone who was innocent. You never talked about how your days were or anything else. But I'm a lawyer, I said. That work is private. You used to share some general thoughts, didn't you? I thought about her words. She was right. I had been so focused on my work that I kept everything to myself. Our relationship changed a lot. How would you feel if, after such a wonderful time together, we barely saw each other once a week? You might start to wonder if there was someone else involved. If you knew how our marriage began, you might think I wanted to leave. But I told you I was upset. I even tried to change things that Sunday. I promised I'd be home. But you said you would be back by 1 or 2. I waited until a little after 2, got tired of waiting, and left. I went out for dinner with a coworker. We got along well, and I realized I needed to think about my own happiness since you weren't there. We had some nice conversations, but it didn't happen again after that. But you never spoke to me about it. I said this, feeling weighed down by her words. You never just asked me. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice was firm. She needed me to understand, so she tried harder. You're still seeing this your way, Mark. You need to see it from my side. I'm in a marriage that I thought would end. You knew about it? I used to make jokes about it often. I didn't understand the jokes back then, I replied. But now I get it. You acted like you understood, but now I see you stepping back. You're not spending time with me. You don't talk to me. You don't share anything with me. When we're together, you seem far away, lost in your own thoughts. Our connection has slowly weakened for months. What do you think? I've thought about it a lot and kept coming back to the same question. If you were happy, why didn't you say anything? If you thought I was moving on, why didn't you talk to me? I believed I knew what was happening from the beginning. I thought you did too. I worried you might not care about my feelings. I closed my eyes and tried to remember everything. Then Sandy's voice pulled me back to reality. When I saw that news conference, everything changed. I realized you weren't pushing me away. You weren't trying to start a new life without me. I saw it when his mother hugged you. You looked both sad and relieved. I could see it on your face. It was like a heavy weight had been taken off. But from what you said before, I could tell you still had worries about us. That's when I realized I had made a big mistake. I promised myself I would do everything to make you feel important in our marriage. I looked at her, trying to find the right words. Sandy wiped her cheeks, drying her tears. She must have noticed my confusion and gave me a small smile. It wasn't a happy smile. It was mixed with sadness and a touch of longing in her eyes. The 3 years after that were the happiest of our lives, weren't they? I thought for a moment, then said yes. They were really good because I promised myself to make things better for us. I wanted to make you love me so much that you would never want to leave. I started to share my thoughts, but she interrupted me with more tears and sniffles. And then, just when I thought we would always be together, right when you finally asked if we could have a family and I felt sure you would always be by my side, you left, Mark. You just disappeared. At that moment, she broke down and cried hard. I wanted to help her, but it was tough with everyone watching us. After one last sob, she pushed her chair back and ran out. I was too stunned to move until I heard someone walking toward our table with heavy steps. That didn't seem to go well, Ferland said. His voice was full of sadness, just like how I felt. He didn't sound confused, though. Both of them were at my apartment this time. We were sitting on the floor eating grilled cheese with bacon and spinach, dipping it in tomato soup from big mugs. Grilled cheese and tomato soup was my favorite meal when I was a kid, but I couldn't feel happy listening to Whitney and Rebecca talk as if I wasn't even there. That really changes things, Whitney said softly. I can understand her point if you believe her, Rebecca said. But it all adds up, right? If she didn't care about him, she could have left or just stayed with her new boyfriend. But he mentioned they were happier in the end than at the start. And that look she had when he talked about starting a family. How do you explain that? Rebecca shrugged. Maybe she wanted a family or something like that. I'm not sure. Her answer seems simple and makes sense. That's when she knew he wouldn't go. That's when everything felt real. But it was all based on misunderstandings. Exactly. And she was part of that. Think about it. If she really believed he understood, wouldn't she have spoken up more directly? Whitney nodded. That does sound a bit unlikely. I could see that coming out during a fight. Did that ever happen, Mark? I asked, listening but not really paying full attention. Did you two ever fight? Did you ever yell at each other to let out your feelings? I shrugged. Sure. Doesn't everyone do that sometimes? And she never said it was a problem. The agreement? Yeah, I said. But then I thought about it and added, well, there were those same comments. Just said louder instead of joking, you know? Like saying, I don't know why I ever said yes to this. Things like that. See? Whitney said. I can picture it happening that way, can't you? Especially if she thought he always knew. That's not fair, Rebecca said sharply. So what do you think? Whitney asked me. I don't know. I think I trust her, but I'm not sure if it really matters. So, you trust her? Rebecca said, surprised by my answer. Yeah, I do. You weren't there, Beck. She was really upset. I can't believe she was just pretending. But she fooled you for years, Rebecca pointed out. She wasn't pretending back then. She was just being Sandy, trying to make the best of a tough situation at first. Then she honestly tried to fix our marriage. She wanted to stay strong, so yes, I believe her. It all makes sense, but you didn't see her face when she talked about our families. I interrupted. She wasn't even mad then. She looked confused, like she couldn't believe they never told me. Rebecca shook her head and I pushed my plate away while Whitney touched my hand. I think you need to talk to her again. You need to figure things out. The divorce is still happening if that's what you want. And I think you should choose what's best for you, Rebecca said. But Whitney kept looking at Rebecca. You don't want to look back 10 years from now and wonder, what if? What if she was serious? What if the girl you dreamed of really cared for you and wanted a future with you? What if she hurts you again and you just accept it? Rebecca argued. What if you keep playing along with their games and they get what they want? What do you get, Mark? I stood up and went quickly to my room, closing the door behind me. I needed some time to myself to think. Lying on my bed, I thought about what Whitney had said. Both she and Rebecca made good points. We were all lawyers, and we understood each other well. Law school changes your way of thinking. We learned in criminal law that actions done without the right intention are just actions. For example, if you're on a roof and accidentally drop something that hurts someone, it's an accident, not a crime. But if you see people below and let it fall on purpose, that's a big deal. In both cases, someone got hurt, but the reason behind it matters. Rebecca had a point too. Ignoring what is true isn't a good excuse. If you drop something on purpose without checking to see if it could hurt someone, it might still be a crime. So I had to think, did Whitney see what was happening? Did she know I didn't realize? Should she have told me? Would I have done things differently if I were in her place? The last situation was really hard because I had to think about being someone very well liked. There was a soft knock at the door. "Can I come in?" Rebecca asked, opening the door a little. I looked at her, and she stopped for a moment before coming in and closing the door. She walked over to the bed and sat beside me, gently placing her hand on my leg. "I'm sorry," she said. "I wish things were different because you don't deserve any of this." "You don't have to apologize," I replied. "Yes, I do. I told you that first night. I usually don't get close to married men, but I've let myself care about one. That's not fair to you, especially now." I sat up and leaned back against the wall, looking at her. "Why have you never been married?" She smiled softly. "I'm just not someone who wants to get married, Mark. If you're thinking about leaving her for me, it wouldn't lead to marriage." "But why not?" I asked. She looked away for a moment, as if lost in thought. We all have things from our past, things we carry with us. Some of us can move on, but it's not always easy. Some people can't. I don't think I can. I wish you could help me, but I really don't know if that's possible. It wouldn't be fair to expect that from you. I nodded and placed my hand over hers. I wasn't sure what to say next. "What I mean is, you need to think about yourself right now. Don't focus on us or what Sandy said. You should think about what you want. This is about you, Mark. It's not about Sandy or your parents. It's time to make a choice for yourself. Once you know what you want, you can talk to Sandy again and see if she fits into that." I thought about her words. She was right. It returned to what they both had said before. It was time to take control of my own life. I thought I was in charge, but now I realized I needed to be more active in deciding my future. "We will still see each other, right?" She smiled and said, "Of course we will." I leaned over and gave her a gentle kiss. It felt warm and made us feel closer, creating a moment of understanding between us. I took a moment to enjoy our connection, thinking it might be the last time we would be close for a while. I leaned my cheek on her hair and lightly touched her shoulder, feeling a calmness I had missed all night. It felt good, and I wondered if I would ever feel this way again. Just when I thought my busy life could not get any more confusing, my parents walked in the next morning at 10:45. They looked both upset and determined. "Hi, Mom and Dad," I said cheerfully. Then I turned to my strong friend next to me. "Ferlin, this is my mom and dad, Senator and Mrs. Roberts. Mom, Dad, this is Ferlin." "Nice to meet you," Ferlin said without much interest. He then walked back to the kitchen. "He's not your boss," Dad said quietly. "Jim Parker is your boss." "What's going on, Mark?" Mom asked. "I'm working," I replied. "I'm a bartender now." "What kind of game is this?" Dad asked. "You quit without telling anyone." Then I left Sandy and came to this small town. "What were you thinking?" "Come on, Dad. You know why I'm here. Do you really think it's just a coincidence that I'm in the same town as Clarice Talbot? Do you think I picked this place for no reason?" Dad looked surprised, and Mom's eyes got big in shock. "You didn't know she was here?" I asked with a smile. "She's here with your son, the brother you never talked about." They shared worried glances before looking back at me. Dad looked worn out, and Mom leaned against the bar for support. "What have you done?" Dad asked, his voice full of concern. "I just wanted to find out the truth," I replied. "For once, I wanted to know the truth about all of you. And don't say you didn't know she was here. Someone made her scared. She's too afraid to even look at me." "Patrol since people found you," he said quickly. "We were asking around, but it was his people who found you. He didn't say how. Please tell me you didn't talk to her. Mom said, her voice tight. Why? Worried I'd ruin everything for you. It's not like that, Mark, Dad said sadly. He looked really troubled and added, Please, not again. I shifted my gaze between them, feeling the pressure of the moment. This was even more difficult than learning about a brother I never knew. My frustration grew and I felt a strange strength seeing them both so uncomfortable. What do you care about what I think, after all you've done to me? Do you really think I worry about your feelings? How can you speak to us like that? Dad said, slamming his hand on the table. I don't know what's happening here, but I won't accept this. You'll accept whatever I say, I shot back, just like I accepted you, putting your own needs before mine. What are you talking about? Mom asked, her eyes narrowing as she tried to see how much I understood. You know exactly what I mean. My marriage, you, Dad, Pat, and Deborah all made plans so you could help Pat Ralston right before the election. I don't know what you thought, but I'm sure you have your own ideas. What do you mean? Dad asked, but I knew what he was trying to avoid. It was hard for him to keep his cool. I decided to be direct. During our weekend at the governor's house, I heard everything. You and the Troll brothers were talking about getting Sandy to marry me and stay with me for a couple of years, all while keeping me in the dark and telling me to chase my dreams. I caught every word, Dad. I saw how you both laughed at how clueless I was. His expression changed, but Mom stood her ground. Does it really matter how things started? We made it happen, Mark. We helped you achieve your dream. You can't say you weren't happy. Sure, but you set up a situation where she could leave whenever she wanted after a year or two. You told her that, right? I pressed on. Why does it matter what we told her? She replied firmly. She didn't leave, did she? You're still together, right? It doesn't really matter how it all started. What matters is that you are married to someone you care about. That is important, Mom, especially now that I know the truth. It feels more important than ever. Why does it matter now that you know she still wants to be with you? Deborah said she doesn't want a divorce. She wants to stay with you forever. I'll explain why it matters, I said, remembering my talk with Whitney. Under the stars. It matters because now I doubt everything about my marriage. My memories seem different now. You think back to when you first met and you remember the thrill, right? Dad nodded, but Mom frowned. Well, I don't see it like that anymore. When I think about when Sandy and I started dating, I just see how I might have been fooled. Every moment I thought she was happy and in love with me. Now I worry she might have felt differently. How does that feel, Mom? Want to share some of your memories? Mom looked angry but determined. I noticed Dad was starting to pull away under my words. I'm sorry, Mark. I didn't realize, he said. I didn't know you would ever find out. Or if you did, I thought you wouldn't care about what I did. Which part didn't you think I'd care about? I asked him. He met my eyes with sadness. I didn't think about any of it, especially you. I got so caught up in it that I barely thought twice. I turned to Mom, who just scoffed. Grow up, boys. The world is tough. If you want something, be ready to fight for it. I stared at her, surprised by what she said. There was no regret, not even a hint of an apology. Instead, she looked proud, like she was teaching us about life. Where is this coming from? I asked, confused. Where is my mom? When did she start acting like this? Don't you dare! She snapped back, leaning in closer. I'm leaving, Ferland said from behind them. Mom froze and Dad looked shocked. Right now, he said firmly. Get out and don't come back, Mom said with a strong look. He replied, You will not, I said, right now. He raised his voice and stepped closer to her. She paused, looked at him, then turned to me and said, This isn't over, Mark. Not even close. After giving Furlan a hard stare, she turned and walked out the door. Dad looked back and forth between Furland and me, then focused on Furland. I'm really sorry about all this, he said quietly. Furland shot him a look and gave me one last sad glance. Dad sighed and left, and the busy lunch rush and cleanup that followed felt blurry. I felt lost and overwhelmed in the noise and activity. Furland was quiet at first. Debbie moved quickly, switching out plates and drinks. After a while, she took over the orders, bringing them out all by herself and not letting me help. I felt like I wasn't doing anything useful and was just in the way, but Debbie never complained. She kept smiling, sharing kind words and laughter. By around 3 o'clock, the place was quiet, and Furlan sat down on a bar stool. That explains a lot. What do you mean? I asked, moving glasses around on the shelf without thinking. Last night with that woman. Sandy, I guess that's your wife and how you've acted since you got here. My interest was sparked. What do you mean by how I've acted since I arrived? You don't really seem to fit in here working behind the bar. Honestly, Mark, you're nice and friendly. You dress well. What did you do before this? I was a lawyer, he chuckled. I guess that explains why those women have noticed you. Still, you don't seem like the usual type. What makes you say that? I asked. You want to make others happy too much. Most lawyers are really confident and think about themselves first. You seem different. You care about what others think and try hard to please them, hoping they'll like you, and that could be a problem. Your mom was right about one thing, Mark. You need to take care of yourself first, not others. Find your own happiness without needing everyone to agree with you. Stop trying so hard to make everyone else happy. Some will appreciate you and some won't. You shouldn't feel like you have to do things just for them. I paused, realizing he was correct. I knew it too. I was still measuring myself against Steve. Steve didn't have to earn people's likes, he just expected them. But he had his own critics. You can't keep everyone happy all the time. Ferland took a moment and then said, I think you have some things to figure out. Like what? I asked. He hesitated, looking at me closely as if considering his words. Finally, he let out a relaxed breath and said, I think you need to talk to your dad, not your mom. She can't help you, but your dad might. He might be having a hard time right now, and you should reach out to him. It's important to learn more about your younger brother. You think you know who has been kept from you? I nodded. Yes, I feel that too. It's like he has lost something, maybe a sense of belonging? Exactly, Ferland replied. I keep thinking about him and how he sees himself. It's more than just feeling bad for him. He looked so tired when he left here. So what should be the next step? What do you think I should do? He got up from the bar stool and put his hand on the counter. You need to have a real conversation with your partner. I sighed deeply. The pressure felt heavy on me. I heard some things last night, even though I tried to avoid it. I caught most of what was said today, too. I think there's something important that you're missing or maybe haven't thought about completely. I replayed the conversations in my head, trying to understand, but I felt lost. Can you help me? I asked. You told your family that your memories are all mixed up, Mark. But some of them are not. At least not all of them. I heard your partner say she worked hard for the last 3 years to make you happy. She tried her best to make you care for her so much that you wouldn't want to go away. So maybe the early memories are a bit unclear, but the ones from later on should be clear, right? I paused and then nodded. Exactly. He kept going. Now you need to think about whether those good memories that are real matter to you, and if you want to learn and grow from them, or if too much has happened for you to move forward. I leaned back against the cooler and stared at the floor. After a moment, I asked softly, What do you think I should do? His voice got lower and a bit rough. I told you, it's about you now. It's your choice to make and yours alone. I wish I could help you more, but I can't. I looked at him and tried to smile. Thanks. You're welcome, he said as he turned to leave, but then stopped and looked back. Honestly, I think you should step outside and take care of this. You don't really need to be here today, but maybe it's good to think things over before talking to anyone else. Okay? Yeah, I answered, going back to my work with a clearer mind and a lot of new ideas. When I finished at 6, I asked Ferland if I could take the next day off. He just grunted. I took that as a yes. I sat on the small patio outside my dining room and played guitar in the cool autumn night. Lost in my thoughts, my left hand made chords while my right hand strummed different tunes. Can you do me a favor? She called from the shadows to my right. How did you find me? I asked. Your address was on the divorce papers, she said, stepping into the soft light by the porch. She looked a bit uncertain. Oh, I replied, still playing the strings as I gazed at her. I hadn't seen much the night before, but now she seemed a little nervous. Her hair was slightly messy and her jeans looked a bit different. Are you taking care of yourself? I asked. Yeah, she said, but her voice didn't sound too sure. She bit her lip and looked around for something to do with her hands. Finally, she stuffed them into her pockets. It gets pretty cold here, she said, trying to make things feel lighter. But it's still warm in Memphis. She fidgeted, showing her unease. I'm sorry about last night. I just shrugged and started to play an old Cat Stevens song, Moon Shadow. It felt nice and fit the strange moment we were sharing. You mentioned a favor, she said. After a moment, she added, Can you play me a song? Which one? I asked. Calico Skies, she answered, just like I thought she would. It was always special for us, both sweet and sad when you knew its meaning. Why don't you sit down? I offered, pointing to an old lawn chair nearby. Okay, she said. She paused for a moment before finally sitting down, looking unsure about what I wanted. How did we get to this point, Sandy? I asked myself, trying to find the right notes of our song. I used to think it was just luck, she said, looking at the dark clouds hiding the moon. We got married to help our families. Then you showed me that you cared. Just when I thought you were done trying, I saw that you weren't. And I wanted you to care for me even more. It felt like I had discovered something wonderful. So at first I was just a mistake, I asked gently. She looked at me, trying to understand how I felt. I kept my expression open, waiting for her answer. You were never just a mistake, Mark. It just didn't start in the right way. But maybe if it had started differently, we wouldn't be here now. Because back then, I wasn't really what you wanted. I pressed on, and she nodded, biting her lips softly, her voice as gentle as the wind when she said, But you became what I wanted, the only person I ever wanted. I nodded. How did that change? Was it because of guilt, or were you worried about finding someone new? She looked down, deep in thought. At first, it was more about being comfortable, not the wild passion you see in movies. We had some special moments, but it wasn't always that way. Over time, though, it started to feel more like that for me. It always felt special. I told her it was like a fairy tale, but it felt real to me. She seemed lost in thought again, gazing at the clouds. I remember when it changed for me. They were teasing you, Peggy Tracy, and the others about how nice you always were and how you tried to make me happy. I thought about you. Compared to their husbands and their lives, their husbands seemed like Stevie. They were confident and sure of themselves. They always acted like one of the guys. They expected dinner to be ready when they got home and didn't want to stay in on weekends because they had plans with friends. I didn't understand why I felt jealous of them. I saw the tears in her eyes shining against the dark sky, and a small smile came to her face. She talked freely, almost like she was just thinking out loud. Then something happened that I really didn't like. It hurt me. I felt angry at you, too. I was scared you would become like the husbands they had. I didn't want that. It took you 3 weeks to even bring it up. By then, I started to think you were talking about someone else. I thought you had met another woman and were planning to leave. When you finally told me it was a big project, I felt like you were creating distance between us. It seemed like you wanted me to be the one to walk away. I didn't want to feel this way because deep down, I knew I cared about you and wanted things to go well. If I hadn't started to like you, I wouldn't have minded that you seemed so far away. But I had fallen for you, and I felt upset with myself for it. I had stopped playing the guitar, taken by a side of Sandy I hadn't noticed before. She paused for a moment and then gave a sad laugh. The funny part is, I remember the moment I saw you on that television. It should have been a happy time for you, but you looked so worn out. You were the one worried about losing me, not the other way around. I felt so ashamed then. It was too much for me. I was in my office with a group of people who were all congratulating me, saying how great this was for me. But all I could see was the look in your eyes during that group hug. You seemed lost and scared. I felt so overwhelmed. I had never felt like that before, not even when Steve passed away. I remember rushing home to be with you, but you didn't come. I just sat there, hoping for another chance to be with you and your boyfriend. I asked about it, and she shook her head. It was just lunch. Really? Maybe 4 or 5 times. We went to his place after lunch last month. But the moment I saw you on that screen and realized you weren't trying to leave me, I decided not to talk to him again. He caught on pretty fast and didn't push the issue. I never did anything wrong, I said quietly. I know, she whispered. After a moment, she looked at me, trying to calm herself down. I wasn't completely honest last night, Mark. In what way? I had a feeling then. I wasn't sure, but I had a feeling. Why didn't you say anything? Because I was scared that if I did, I would have to tell everything. I was afraid that if I was totally honest, you might walk away from me. I never wanted that. Not then, not ever. I just wanted a chance to make things right, to act like it never happened, so we could return to how we were before. Did you really think we were like a married couple? She smiled at the idea and nodded. Yes, I tried my hardest. Not for me, but for you, for us. Hearing her words made me feel sad again. Sad about what happened and how we seemed to have lost something important. Please give me a chance, Mark. Please. I'll do anything you want. Just come back. That's not going to happen, I replied. Not now, not ever. She instantly looked down, covering her face with her hands, shaking with tears. I reached out and gently took her hands away, saying, I'm not saying we'll get back together, but if we ever do, I won't go back to Memphis, not even to visit. I won't help your father with his campaign, and I won't go anywhere near Tennessee again. What do you mean? She asked quickly, wiping her tears away, her eyes looking for hope. I'm still thinking about it, Sandy, but you need to take what I said seriously. She nodded, her expression serious. No more Tennessee and our parents. I paused to collect my thoughts. They haven't treated me well. I don't want to be around them. You need to think carefully about this. If I decide to give it another try, you would need to move here, and I might just work as a bartender while playing music again. A small smile started to show through her tears. You really want to live your own life? Yes, I do. I want to make my own choices, not just follow what my parents wanted me to do. And you're still unsure about us because I'm part of that pressure, right? She asked, her smile fading a little. That's not the main reason. I'm still thinking about us. I remembered how happy we were when everything felt right. But you're worried the past might be too hard to handle, she said quietly, her face turning serious. Yeah, I admitted, looking at her. She looked back at me and held my hand, giving it a soft squeeze. I squeezed her hand back. After a moment, she asked, Can you play that old song for me? I hesitated before letting go of her hand. Then I began to play the intro. The song went, I knew I would love you from the first time I saw you. You brought light into my life. I will hold you for as long as you want. I will hold you forever. It wasn't hard to get my dad's phone number. I just needed to call his office to see where he was. Talking to Dad was hard because my mom answered the phone. Yes, she said sharply. I need to talk to Dad. I added, after how you treated us yesterday and letting that man talk to us like that in front of everyone, you better put him on or I'm hanging up. You can't make demands like this. I'm your mother, Mark. I heard Dad say something in the background, but I couldn't understand the words. Mark? Dad asked, sounding worried. Mark, are you there? Breakfast in an hour, I said firmly. Just don't bring her, okay? Where? He asked. I told him about a small diner by the highway coming into town. When we hung up, Mom was still complaining. I arrived 10 minutes late and saw Dad sitting in a corner booth pouring himself some coffee. He looked tired, his face showing the marks of his 59 years. Thanks for calling and wanting to meet, he said as I slid into the booth. I don't want to meet. I just need to know the truth about Clarice Talbot. Let's get to it. He seemed to shrink at the name, looking defeated. I waved the waitress over to order us some coffee. The little boy isn't your brother? Dad asked quietly. He's your nephew. Steve's son? Really? She was just Steve's secretary, right? Dad looked lost in thought, worry clear on his face. When I was busy with my work, Stevie had just come home from school. Clarice was my personal secretary. She was a hard worker, always ready to help out. I had many campaign events to go to. I was running for re-election, remember? I nodded, thinking about all those long days. He stopped for a moment. So I encouraged him to keep talking. You were still in school, so I thought you might not remember. But you remember how busy it was. Yeah, I know, I said, feeling a bit impatient. Sorry, he replied, taking a sip of water before he went on. Anyway, we were in Chattanooga for the weekend, going to rallies. I got back to the hotel pretty late after chatting with some people. It was a little after midnight, and I didn't think much about it since Stevie wasn't there. We were sharing a room, and Clarice was with one of the PR staff. I couldn't recall the other woman's name. And why does this matter? I asked, trying to hold back my annoyance. Can you just tell me what happened? He looked like he was lost in his thoughts, staring into space. I felt uneasy, like this had something to do with Stevie's death. I didn't see her right away. I only saw the empty beds. I thought Stevie was out having fun. Then I heard a quiet sound from the corner. It was like someone was trying to hide. When I turned on the light, there she was, looking scared and trying to stay out of sight. Her clothes were messy, and she looked really upset. I knew right away that something was wrong, even if I didn't want to believe it about my own son. Stevie had hurt her, I thought, saying what he couldn't. He looked at me, and after a moment he said, "Yeah, I just don't understand what he was thinking. None of us will. But he did hurt her, and if he had been there when I arrived, I don't know what I would have done." What happened next? His lips trembled as he tried to stay calm. I called the person in charge for Clarice right away, of course. What else could I do? "Why not call the police?" I asked. He gave a sad smile that soon softened. "Of course, Mark. That's what you would have done. I know I should have." In that moment, I was focused on everything the other woman was saying. My mind was racing with thoughts. I could see it all. My job in the Senate was at risk. My son was in trouble. "Did you talk to Clarice Talbot?" "Yes, I did," he said quietly. "Do you think I would ignore her?" I wasn't sure, so I took a sip of my coffee. What happened next? She was helping Clarice with some clothes while I searched for someone who could assist the girl. Just when I was starting to lose hope, I heard a knock at the door. It was the police telling me that Stevie had been in an accident. "So you kept it a secret?" I said you didn't mention anything. He nodded slowly. What good would it have done to say something? What about justice for Clarice Talbot? Would going public really have made a difference? She would have had to deal with questions and rumors. Your mother was right, Mark. You can be very stubborn sometimes. You act like it's something to hide, Dad. Like I'm wrong for wanting to do what's right. Is that such a bad thing? He looked down and said softly, "No." "So when did you find out what was happening? And why didn't she think about other options, 3 months later?" At first, she thought it was just nerves from that night. But as time passed, her situation changed. "How did you find out? Did she call you?" "I went to see her a couple of times a week just to check on her and see if she needed anything. I was worried about her." He raised his hand for another cup of coffee and kept talking. "Once the cup was full, I went to visit her one day and she told me she was going to have a baby. I was shocked. I didn't want to believe it, but she said she was going to keep the baby. I think she's very religious and her family is very involved in their faith. This made things even harder for her because I knew her parents would not be supportive at all." "So you decided to help her?" I asked. I told her I would be there for her until the baby was born. After that, we could figure out how to help her and look for a job. And what did she say? Not much. She seemed to want to be alone, especially from me. "And what about the baby?" "I don't even know his name," Dad admitted. "The only way we keep in touch is through a postcard she sends whenever she moves. We send her money every month without fail." "His name is Skylar," I said, watching my dad's face. "Your grandson is named Skylar. He plays football and looks healthy, just like I did when I was a kid. I guess he takes after you. Stevie looks more like Mom, but your side shows in this one." Dad looked surprised, as if he was picturing the little boy. "Skylar," he repeated. "Yes, Skylar. He lives about a mile away in a small house with a mother who still seems to be having a hard time. Now she's worried because someone came to her door, talked about me, and showed her my picture. I can't even meet her or get close to my nephew if she doesn't let me. I wouldn't blame her if she didn't want to talk. She had been through a lot with Robert's men before, but that was my dad's side of things. Dad said I didn't do anything wrong. I don't want to hear excuses, Dad," I interrupted. "I want to know what you're going to do about this now." He looked at me with a serious expression. He stood up, finished his coffee, and said, "I'm going outside for a bit, and then you're going to take me to her, okay?" When we got to Clarice Talbot's house, she wasn't there. Dad said we should wait in the car until she came back. 2 hours later, I suggested we get lunch, but he refused to leave. By 1:30, I felt restless and needed to move. He told me to go find a tree. He wasn't leaving before 1:50. Just then, Clarice drove into the driveway and stepped out of her car. Before she could reach her door, Dad got out and called her name. "Wait a minute." She paused and turned slowly towards him. I followed Dad as he crossed the street and walked up to her porch, looking up at her. "Senator?" she said, looking nervous. "Clarice, just take a minute to breathe," he replied. "I'm not sure what you heard, but you're not in any trouble, okay?" She nodded, but it was clear she still had doubts. Dad checked around the house before turning back to Clarice. Do you mind if we come in for a moment? I think Mark here needs to use the bathroom. She looked between us, then said, Sure, come in. We walked into a tidy living room with an old TV, a worn couch, and a second-hand rocking chair. The bathroom's down the hall, she said quietly, not looking at us. First door on the left. I hurried to the bathroom, quickly washed my hands, and hurried back. Clarice was sitting on the couch, her hands in her lap and her head down. Dad was in the rocking chair in front of her, speaking softly. I'm really sorry, he said. Why didn't you tell me? We're doing just fine. You're not fine, Clarice. I promised I'd help you, but you've got to let me. I did try to tell you, she said, her eyes shining with hope. Last year I sent you a letter to your house so no one at the office would find it. I told you I was struggling. I never got it, Clarice. I really didn't, I replied. I had a feeling I knew where it had gone. My mom might have had something to do with it. Well, I did, she insisted. I'm trying, Senator, but you don't know how hard it is. What are you getting paid? I asked suddenly. How much are you getting for helping Skylar and everything else? $1,500 a month, Dad answered. $400 a month, Clarice said at the same time. Dad looked surprised. It's $1,500. No, Dad, I said. It's $400. That's how I found out about it. I looked at the financial records. It's always $400. He looked like he couldn't believe it. But what it was supposed to be, who set it all up? I asked. I don't know, he replied. Maybe Jim Parker, but I didn't really tell him it was meant to be that way. You left Mom in charge of it, didn't you? I asked. He nodded slowly, still in shock. And you? I looked over at Clarice. You probably wrote other letters to the house too, right? She glanced at Dad and nodded. Yes, for 5 years, maybe 15 or 20 letters. When that man came to the door, he wanted to know what I had discovered. Right? I asked. She softly replied, a bit nervous. Yes. And he warned you that if you lied, it would be bad for you, right? Right. I switched my gaze from her to Dad. I think I figured it out yesterday, Dad. She's been through a lot. Mom isn't exactly nice, and Stevie has some of her traits. Dad stared at me, looking shocked about Mom's behavior. But you're going to fix this, right, Dad? He nodded. You're going to fix it now, right? He nodded again, this time faster. Then take out your checkbook now. He pulled it from his jacket pocket. What are you waiting for? Start writing, I urged. He picked up a pen, and I turned to leave. I was a few blocks away when I heard her calling my name. I turned around and saw Clarice Talbot running to catch up. I stopped and walked back to her. She leaned over to catch her breath. I'm sorry, I said. I didn't know. That's why you came here, isn't it? Yes, she replied. And that's also why you cheered at his games. Exactly, I said. At first, I thought he was my brother. I thought you and Dad were together. Do you understand? What do you know? She asked. I know pretty much everything Dad told me this morning. He said Skylar is my nephew, I answered. She stood up, still trying to breathe normally. He told you that Stephen hurt me, right? That's how it all happened. I nodded and added, he also told me they were helping you and Skylar, but I saw your house, and I thought they could do more. Plus, I remember the look on your face when you closed the door on me. I heard you on the phone, so you brought him here to tell me to fix everything, right? I just didn't want you to have to worry because of what I did, I said. How did this happen? I left and came up here to find you and my little brother. That's why I came. You didn't tell anyone? It's a long story. I'd like to hear it one day. She looked at me seriously. Whatever happened, it seems bigger than just this. I've never seen anyone speak to your father like that. You wouldn't believe it. I think I would, especially if it's about your mom. I believe it for sure. Well, maybe one day I'll share it all with you. I glanced at her for a moment, then turned to walk away. Hey, Mark, she called. I stopped and looked back. I know he's not really your brother, but he is your nephew, right? I know, I was just thinking if you'd want to meet him sometime. I smiled. I'd really like that, more than you know. I paused and added, but it might be difficult for you knowing I'm related to someone who, well, you understand. She shook her head. You're nothing like him, not at all. Skylar really needs someone in his life, so any time you can spend with him would be really helpful. I nodded. Be careful what you ask for. If all goes well, he'll be playing drums in a small band I want to start. She laughed. Thanks. Just what I need, a little drummer playing all the time. We can sort things out at his game on Sunday if that works for you. That sounds perfect, she said. And Mark, thank you. I really mean it. I waved her off and turned to feel the cold wind on my face. Sandy was right. It was chilly up here. I decided I should grab some warmer clothes. There was no way I was leaving now. My afternoon had turned into a long walk from Clarice's place back to the diner to get my car. Then I called Whitney to arrange a meeting for her and Rebecca. After driving around and thinking about everything for almost 2 hours, I finally made the appointment and shared what happened. My parents arrived the night before, along with my brother, my nephew, and Clarice. It was a lot to handle. When it was all done, they looked just as worn out as I felt. They didn't want to eat, so I went back to my small apartment. It was dark when I got home, and I turned on the kitchen light. I hadn't eaten all day, and my stomach was rumbling, even though I still felt chilly. I decided not to have soup, so by 7:30 I found myself alone at the table with an Italian beef sandwich topped with sweet peppers and a side salad. I didn't really taste my food, but the beer helped calm me down. I glanced at the clock. It was 10 minutes to 8, and I threw away my half-finished meal before going to the bedroom. I opened the door and heard some movement on the bed. When I turned on the lights, I saw Sandy lying there, curled up on her side, fast asleep. I smiled, not worried about how she got in. I changed into my pajama pants and a t-shirt, then climbed into bed beside her. She moved a little and then went back to softly snoring. I lay there, feeling happy just watching her sleep for the first time in months. Then a thought came to me. I had my answer. I wondered if she had found hers too. I thought it was a dream. She whispered when the sun woke me up. I turned to her and smiled. "How did you get in?" I asked. "The patio door was unlocked," she said. "I guess you forgot to lock it last night." "When did you come here?" I asked. "It was late afternoon. I called your work, but they said you took the day off. I must have fallen asleep while waiting for you." "You did fall asleep pretty early," she replied. "I went to bed just before 8, and you were already asleep." "I don't usually sleep that soundly," I said. "Next time, I'll record you sleeping," I joked. "Are you serious?" she asked, thinking it over. "I do sleep pretty deeply." "What kind of sleep is it?" I asked. "What do you mean?" she replied. "Is it loud or soft?" I asked. "It's a soft sound that you can barely hear." "The loud kind," she laughed. "No way," I said. She giggled and playfully pushed me away. I smiled as I remembered the old Sandy, the one who was always so lively. "I came here to tell you something," she said after a short pause. "What is it?" "That I will go wherever you want and do whatever you need in any way you wish." Her voice was strong and sincere. Then she softened her tone and added, "But only if you're ready to give us another chance. Please let me have another chance, even if it means staying here, in this town or this little apartment. Does it really matter?" She shrugged. "We can find a better place if you want. But if you prefer to stay here, then I will stay here with you." I smiled. "Are you sure? But there's just one condition." "What is it?" I asked, curious. "This new you, the one who will start doing what he wants. He still needs to keep the old you, too. Meaning?" I fell for the Mark Roberts, who cared for me and liked spending time together. If you want to be in a band and follow your dreams, that's wonderful. But I still want the Mark who sings to me, holds my hand, and usually lets me pick the movies. Is that Mark still here? So I guess I have to keep watching those sentimental movies you always like. She nodded, but didn't smile. She bit her lip and said, "Sorry, we can watch more of yours, but I still want to see some of mine. So what you mean is, if we decide to try again, you want it to still feel like a team effort. I can't just be in charge, right?" Something like that. Even if it gets playful and includes a little teasing. "Get out," she said, pushing me back with a laugh, playing around in the cold. "Are you serious? So playful teasing is okay?" She gave a light shrug. "Sure, why not? You can handle it." I laughed. But then I thought more about what she said and fell quiet. Rebecca had mentioned my past in a way I didn't expect. "What?" I asked. "I may have had a friend up here." A worried look crossed her face. "Do you still care about her?" "I never got that far." "But you're still in touch with her?" "I only saw her a few times." "Sandy?" "We mostly just became friends. What about you?" "Yes." She closed her eyes and leaned back. I thought we were done for good. I told her that everything was just a joke from the beginning. She opened her eyes, looked up at the ceiling, and said, "Can we talk about this later? Are you sure that's a good plan?" "Absolutely. I just need some time to think." "Why's that?" She turned to look at me. "You being friends with her reminds me of 3 years ago. You felt like I did back then. It felt like it wasn't really a marriage. So, what's the issue, right?" "Pretty much," I said. "So how can I blame you for what happened? Especially since I acted the same way before." "I guess that's true, but still." She shook her head. "You did it after I showed you how much I cared for you for years. That makes it hurt more. But I did the same thing to you after you showed me how you felt for a long time. I didn't mean to hurt you. I said we just had a moment. It doesn't matter if it was only once," she said softly while touching my cheek. "What matters is that I need to deal with it, okay? And I will, I promise." "If you need more time to think," I began, but she interrupted me. "I don't need more time, Mark. I know what I want. We both have things to work on, all right? I just didn't expect this to be one of them." It surprised me. "What do you mean? Am I not enough?" "No," she said with a smile. "You're wonderful. I can't believe I didn't see you in the crowd when I arrived. Did I forget to mention them?" She laughed gently and nudged me playfully. "Go brush your teeth. You seem really happy today," Ferland said as I cleaned up after lunch. "Things are looking better, my friend." "Friend." I smiled. "Things are definitely looking better." He looked at me for a moment and then smiled back. "Good for you. Thanks. Thanks for everything." "I really mean it," he said with a sigh. "You're still welcome. Are you leaving soon?" "Not right now, but I will be." "Try to let me know a week in advance, okay?" "I can give you 3 days." "That works." Rebecca and Whitney came by after work for a drink. "So, you two are getting back together?" Whitney asked, her face glowing with excitement. "It looks that way," I replied. Rebecca seemed surprised, but then smiled and shrugged. "Well, maybe next time," she said. I leaned over and told them, "This doesn't change anything for me, except for Ferland, Teddy Cooper, Nick Harlan, and everyone else around here. You're the only friends I have up here." "So, you're staying here?" Rebecca asked. "Not going back to that well-paying job in Memphis. I'm staying here with Sandy." "Yes," Sandy smiled brightly. "Cool." Just then, a guy walked over. "Hey there," he said. Whitney's face lit up. "Hey to you too," she replied, happy to see him. He leaned over to greet her, then turned to me. "Got a bottle of Bud?" Aaron Whitney spoke up. "This is Mark Roberts, the person I've been talking about." Mark gave me a friendly smile, but looked me over carefully. "Hey, Mark," I said, shaking his hand. "You're a police officer, right?" I guessed. "No, just a lucky guess," he replied. About half an hour later, when everyone else had left, Rebecca caught my eye. She glanced down at her hand on the bar. I looked down too and saw her pushing a small folded note toward the bar. When she lifted her hand, I focused back on her face. She smiled brightly as she walked away. I watched her leave before picking up the note to read it. It said, "Loyola Law School has 3 openings for associate professor starting next fall. Just thought you might want to know." I considered it for a moment and then tucked the note into my pocket. I was really interested. After work, Sandy came to join me for a drink. We were sitting in a corner when her father walked in with my dad and Mark. He called out to us, forcing a smile. "Pat!" I answered him without getting up. He stopped for a moment, and his smile faded a little, but then he put it back on and moved closer. "So we found you, kid." "Can I sit?" I asked. "Yes, Daddy," I replied. Sandy, however, added with a polite smile, "We do mind." His face grew serious and the smile disappeared. He stood up taller, trying to take control. "I just want to know that you're okay," he said. "We're fine, Daddy," Sandy said firmly. "Got it. We're living here now, and we don't want anything to do with you. Nothing at all." "Who do you think you are?" "Let's go, Mark," she said. She stood up from her stool and took my hand. I followed her to the door. Halfway there, she stopped and turned back. "And let's be clear, Dad," she said, stressing the word Dad. "You leave us alone and make sure everyone else does too. If the press shows up at our door, I will tell them everything. You can explain to the voters how you misled them using your own daughter," she added. His face showed anger, and he clenched his fists. Say you understand, she said through gritted teeth. He just looked at her. Say it, she encouraged. I understand. With that, she turned around and led me out of the door. She came back to my small apartment with me. Before Sandy came, I was fine with the place. It suited my needs, but now I felt a bit shy. Rebecca was right. It seemed more like a dorm than a real home. I'm so hungry, Sandy said as she took off her jackets and scarves, shaking out her hair. Do you have anything to eat? Just a sandwich, I suggested. She raised an eyebrow. That's it? Yep. Is that all you've been eating for the last 2 months? Yep. She started to smile. What kind of sandwich? I opened the freezer. It's Thursday, so it's Tex-Mex, sloppy joes with ground bison. Bison like buffalo meat? Exactly. Is it any good? I don't know, I haven't tried it yet. She moved closer and gave me a warm hug. You've changed, Mark, and I think it's for the better. How have I changed? I'm not sure. You just have. So, are you ready for some sloppy joes? Sure. She helped me heat up the filling. 20 minutes later, we sat across from each other at a small table. Our eyes met as we ate, but we struggled to talk. After I finished and put my plate down, I gently touched the back of Sandy's hand. Her eyes filled with tears. I wiped a tear from her cheek and asked, What's wrong? I thought I lost you. For 2 months, I was scared I wouldn't see you again. When I found you, it was so overwhelming. I'm sorry, I said. It's not your fault, she replied. It's mine, mostly theirs. She took my hand and placed it softly against her cheek. If this happens again, if things don't go well and you decide to move on, please tell me directly, okay? It's going to be okay, Sandy, I promised. What do you mean? She asked. But if it doesn't work out, promise me you won't just leave. I promise, I said. She smiled and leaned into my hand. Thanks, she added. After a few moments, we both felt calmer. I was at the sink washing the dishes while Sandy dried them and put them away. She became playful, splashing water on my shirt until I did the same to her. Maybe I splashed a bit too much. I'm all wet, she said, looking at her damp shirt. Serves you right, I replied. Fine, she said, a smile spreading across her face as mischief sparkled in her eyes. Might as well enjoy this now. She started to unbutton her shirt, but I pretended not to notice. What are you doing? I asked. You know what I'm doing? I shook my head with a smile. Not a clue. We need to finish the dishes. This can wait, she said, stepping a bit closer. Unless you're too busy with the dishes, let's take a break. I leaned in for a gentle kiss, feeling happy to be near her. Her slender figure felt familiar, and our connection was clear. Wait, I said, pulling back a little. What's wrong? She asked, looking puzzled. I grinned. I want to see you enjoy this moment right here, she replied, glancing out the window. You started it, I said playfully. Is this part of that adventurous spirit I've heard about? Maybe, she said, intrigued. We both laughed lightly, and the mood became fun and happy. Are you going to join me? She asked with a smile. Join you in what? I replied, feeling playful. Let's make this a fun time. I laughed and liked how spontaneous everything felt. Just like this, she said, keeping the cheerful feeling between us. She removed her top with ease, moving gracefully. I admired her and felt a warm connection growing between us. Now it's your turn, she said softly. I followed her lead and took off the rest of my shirt. As I moved closer, I wrapped my arms around her and we shared a gentle kiss. One arm held her close while my other hand softly caressed her arm. This feels nice, she whispered, her voice warm and friendly. She led me to the soft floor where we could be comfortable together. Our bond grew stronger as we hugged each other tightly. In that quiet moment, we both felt how deep our connection was. The outside world disappeared, leaving just the two of us, connected in a way that words couldn't fully capture. Later, as we rested together and our breathing slowed down, smiles came easily. You've really worked up an appetite, haven't you? I joked. She returned my smile, love shining in her eyes. I'm just really happy, she said. Are you going to keep this up? I teased. Maybe, she answered with a thoughtful grin and moved closer to me, her mood changing. I asked, What are you thinking about? She sighed softly and replied, "It still feels unreal, you know?" "Why is that?" I wondered. I was really scared. For weeks I thought I would never see you again. When my mom told me that you didn't even know I was worried, I thought you might forget about me. "And does this feel more real to you now?" I asked. "It does," she said, cuddling into me. "It's not only about having fun, although that's nice. It's about this feeling, just you holding me. It felt real waking up with you. But I want to feel this way when I go to sleep too. Are you asking if you can spend the night? Is that too much? Too fast?" I shook my head and said no. I think I need this moment too, I thought. She smiled and moved closer to me. Soon she was softly sleeping, her gentle breath brushing against my chest. The next morning she woke me up like she always did on Sundays. I would recommend this to anyone for a great start to the day. That Friday during dinner we talked about everything. I caught Sandy up on what I had told her about Clarice Talbot, my brother's troubling actions, and my nephew. Sandy was surprised, but not totally shocked by what Stevie did. "I'm sorry, Mark," she said. "I know he's your brother, but he can be really mean. I thought that made him strong, but it didn't. Sometimes he was just unkind." "But you still cared about him," I pointed out. She shook her head. I loved the idea of him and who he might become. One sunny afternoon, we talked about what it would be like to be the prom king and queen, living in a nice home with wonderful kids. But later, I realized he would have been just like other tough partners. I might have had the house and the kids, but I would not have had a true friend beside me. "You think I'm your soulmate?" I asked, feeling surprised. "Of course I do," she said, looking at me in a strange way. "Don't you feel that way about me?" "No," I replied. "I see you as the balance in my life. You help me in ways that matter. How is that different?" "I think it is." She thought for a moment. Then I told her how my music jobs had led me to meet Teddy and Nick, who helped with my songs. At first, she didn't seem very interested because she didn't know who they were. "They wrote the music for Leadfoot," I said. Suddenly, it made sense to her. "And now they're in General Beauregard." "Exactly." "Wow," she said. "That sounds important, right?" I felt really happy. "They're going to help me share my songs with everyone." She stopped for a moment and asked, "Is this what you want to do now?" "Be a songwriter? Just part-time. I'm also thinking about becoming a law professor full-time," I replied. She laughed. "So you'll have fans and students too?" I chuckled. "You can never have too many fans. And what if I dress up for class, Professor?" She moved closer with a playful smile. "Maybe you could be a little fun in class." "You cheeky girl," I said, laughing softly and giving her a light poke. "Is that a good poke or a bad one?" "Just a fun poke," she said, looking back at me with sparkling eyes. That led to a fun time discovering new moments together. Later, she asked me to put on some lotion, and it turned out to be just as nice as what we had shared before. On Sunday at noon, Sandy and I sat under one umbrella with Clarice Talbot, all of us trying to stay warm as the cold rain fell around us. We laughed and shook a little from the unusual weather so far up north. I might not have noticed him if someone hadn't stood up and left near the end of the first quarter. He was by himself and didn't have an umbrella. His baseball cap was wet as he tried to stay warm. Even from where we sat, I could see he looked very deep in thought as he watched his grandson play in the muddy field. I nudged Sandy to look. Her expression was hard to read. Clarice turned, looked closely, and whispered, "It was never his fault. None of it was." I kept quiet, but Sandy spoke up. "If he really cared, he would have done something." Clarice replied, "But she's his wife. If you can't trust your partner, who can you trust?" Sandy glanced at me, then looked down. I took her cold hand in mine and held it gently to warm her up a bit. "You're right," I said to Clarice. "It's hard to believe good things can come from someone you've been with for so long. But he could have been there for you." Sandy quietly spoke after a moment. "He could have tried harder. He could have been more involved in Skylar's life." Clarice let out a sigh. "Maybe, but I'm not sure I would have allowed it. But why now? Because time has gone by. Now he wants to do better. It's not just about money, though that helps. It's not his responsibility either. I think he feels ashamed. He has always believed it was his fault for what happened before Clarice looked at me. I don't know what he did to you, but it was more than just this. Still, I don't think he is completely at fault. You might want to consider that. I stayed still, watching him. He seemed lost in thought. The team scored a touchdown late in the game. Not Skylar, but the quarterback. Skylar made an important block just before they reached the end zone, and they managed to win 6-0. After the game, Skylar ran up to us and gave his mom a big hug, making her raincoat all muddy. "We did it," he shouted. He was full of joy after a tough match, undefeated. "Mom, do you know what this means?" "No, dear," she said, gently fixing his hair. "What does it mean?" "I get a trophy," he said, grinning wide, showing his missing baby teeth. Then he looked at us. "Who are your parents?" Clarice knelt down next to him. "This is your Uncle Mark," she said. "And this is your Aunt Sandy." He looked confused. "I have an uncle and an aunt?" I noticed my dad standing nearby, looking sad as he shifted from foot to foot. I cleared my throat, and when Clarice saw me, I nodded toward my dad. She glanced over and gave a small, sad smile. "And a grandpa, too?" "A grandpa? He's over there, sweetie," she said. Skylar turned to look, unsure. After a moment, he asked quietly, "Are you my grandpa?" Dad paused for a second, then nodded. Skylar walked over to him, stopped, and looked up. "Where have you been?" Dad cleared his throat, and I could see he was trying not to cry. His body grew tense, and it looked like he wanted to lean down and hold the little boy close. After a short pause, he said, "I guess I haven't been a very good grandpa, have I?" "No," the boy replied. They stared at each other for a moment. Then, Skylar slowly stretched out his small hand and asked, "Can you buy me a hot chocolate before they run out of tears mixed with the rain on Dad's face?" He answered, "Yeah, I'd love to." The little boy led him to the snack stand at the edge of the field, where many players gathered. "He wants to be part of Skylar's life," Clarice said as she watched them. "We talked about it after you left, and I think it's good for Skylar and my mom." I asked, "What did she say?" She shook her head. "He didn't think that was a good idea." "He's right." We walked to the snack stand together and stood to the side. Sandy asked Clarice, "Do you have any plans for an early dinner?" She shrugged. "Probably just soup and sandwiches. It's a chilly day like this." "You're in luck," Sandy said, her mood brightening even though the sky was gray. "Do you think Skylar likes bacon and tomato on his grilled cheese?" I looked at Sandy and smiled. "But it's not grilled cheese night." "It is now," she replied, turning to Clarice. "Are you two in?" Dad turned down Sandy's dinner invite. "Thanks," he said, avoiding my eyes. "I have a flight back to Washington. There are some important things I need to take care of." "Will we see you again soon?" Sandy asked. He looked up, surprised. "You still want to?" He turned to me, but I kept my face serious. He looked down again. I let him think for a moment, then said, "I don't know, Dad, you hurt me." He nodded. "I understand, I'm sorry, more sorry than you know." "But now you have a grandson here," I said. "A grandson who shouldn't be left behind again." He glanced at Clarice and Skylar as they walked to her car. "Is it too late?" "Yeah, it feels too late," I replied. "But better late than never, right?" he asked. "But your mother," he said, still looking at Skylar with a look of affection I hadn't seen in a long time. "It seems you have some choices," I replied. He turned back to me, hoping for a sign that I understood him. I didn't give him one. After a moment, he slowly nodded. I took Sandy's hand and we walked away, leaving him there in the rain. 9 months later, I was waiting by the front door of our small home just a few blocks from my nephew's house. "Hurry up!" I called out. "I'm going to miss my train." "I found it!" Sandy shouted from down the hall. "Slow down! You might trip!" She paused at the end of the hall, smiled brightly, and raised her camera to take a picture. "Look at you! You look great!" "You think?" I said, adjusting my jacket. "My own professor," she said, putting the camera down to come over and fix my tie. "This is amazing!" "You think?" I asked. "I really do." "Well," I replied, "I think this is even better," as I placed my hand gently on her belly. "Even better," she said, placing her hand over mine and touching our baby bump. "Is that even a word? It should be." She smiled widely and looked at me with kindness. "Do your best, Professor. Thanks for listening to One Infidelity Hit. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop us a like.